Chapter 11. Another boy's mother. Arthur's mother was English. Her name was Mrs. Milligan. She was a widow, and Arthur was her only son. At least, it was supposed that he was her only son living, for she had lost an elder child under mysterious conditions. When the child was 6 months old, it had been kidnapped, and they had never been able to find any trace of him. It is true that, at the time he was taken, Mrs. Milligan had not been able to make the necessary searches. Her husband was dying, and she herself was dangerously ill, and knew nothing of what was going on around her. When she regained consciousness, her husband was dead, and her baby had disappeared. Her brother-in-law, Mr. James Milligan, had searched everywhere for the child. There being no heir, he expected to inherit his brother's property. Yet, after all, Mr. James Milligan inherited nothing from his brother. For 7 months after the death of her husband, Mrs. Milligan's second son, Arthur, was born. But the doctors said that this frail, delicate child could not live. He might die at any moment. In the event of his death, Mr. James Milligan would succeed to the fortune. He waited and hoped, but the doctor's predictions were not fulfilled. Arthur lived. It was his mother's care that saved him. When he had to be strapped to a board, she could not bear the thought of her son being closed up in a house. So she had a beautiful barge built for him, and was now traveling through France on the various canals. Naturally, it was not the first day that I learned all this about the English lady and her son. I learned these details little by little while I was with her. I was given a tiny cabin on the boat. What a wonderful little room it appeared to me. Everything was spotless. The only article of furniture that the cabin contained was a bureau. But what a bureau! Bed, mattress, pillows, and covers combined. And attached to the bed were drawers containing brushes, combs, etc. There was no table or chairs, at least not in their usual shape, but against the wall was a plank, which when pulled down was found to be a little square table and chair. How pleased I was to get into that little bed! It was the first time in my life that I had felt soft sheets against my face. Mother Barbarians were very hard, and they used to rub my cheeks, and VITALIS, and I had more often slept without sheets, and those at the cheap lodging houses at which we stayed were just as rough as Mother Barbarians. I woke early, for I wanted to know how my animals had passed the night. I found them all at the place where I had installed them the night before, and sleeping as though the beautiful barge had been their home for several months. The dogs jumped up as I approached, but Pretty Heart, although he had one eye half open, did not move. Instead, he commenced to snore like a trombone. I guessed at once what was the matter. Pretty Heart was very sensitive. He got angry very quickly and sulked for a long time. In the present circumstances, he was annoyed because I had not taken him into my cabin, and he showed his displeasure by pretending to be asleep. I could not explain to him why I had been forced to leave him on deck, and as I felt that I had, at least in appearances, done him an injury, I took him in my arms and cuddled him, to show him that I was sorry. At first, he continued to sulk, but soon, with his changeable temper, he thought of something else, and by his signs made me understand that if I would take him for a walk on land, he would perhaps forgive me. The man who was cleaning the deck was willing to throw the plank across for us, and I went off into the fields with my troop. The time passed, playing with the dogs and chasing Pretty Heart. When we returned, the horses were harnessed and the barge in readiness to start. As soon as we were all on the boat, the horses began to trot along the towing path. We glided over the water without feeling a movement, and the only sound to be heard was the song of the birds, the swish of the water against the boat, and the tinkle of bells around the horses' necks. Here and there the water seemed quite black, as though it was of great depth. In other parts it was as clear as crystal, and we could see the shiny pebbles and velvety grass below. I was gazing down into the water when I heard someone call my name. It was Arthur. He was being carried out on his board. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Better than in the field." I told him that I had, after I had politely spoken to Mrs. Milligan. "And the dogs?" asked Arthur. I called to them. They came running up with Pretty Heart, the latter making grimaces, as he usually did when he thought that we were going to give a performance. Mrs. Milligan had placed her son in the shade and had taken a seat beside him. "Now," she said to me, "you must take the dogs and the monkey away. We are going to work." I went with the animals to the front of the boat. What work could that poor little boy do? I looked round and saw that his mother was making him repeat a lesson from a book she held in her hand. He seemed to be having great difficulty in mastering it, but his mother was very patient. "No," she said at last. "Arthur, you don't know it at all. I can't, Mama. I just can't," he said plaintively. "I'm sick. Your head is not sick. I can't allow you to grow up in utter ignorance because you're an invalid, Arthur." That seemed very severe to me, yet she spoke in a sweet, kind way. "Why do you make me so unhappy? You know how I feel when you won't learn. I cannot, Mama, I cannot." And he began to cry. But Mrs. Milligan did not let herself be won over by his tears, although she appeared touched and even more unhappy. "I would have liked to have let you play this morning with Rémi and the dogs," she said, "but you cannot play until you know your lessons perfectly." With that she gave the book to Arthur and walked away, leaving him alone. From where I stood I could hear him crying. How could his mother, who appeared to love him so much, be so severe with the poor little fellow? A moment later she returned. "Shall we try again?" she asked gently. She sat down beside him and, taking the book, she began to read the fable called "The Wolf and the Sheep." She read it through 3 times, then gave the book back to Arthur and told him to learn it alone. She went inside the boat. I could see Arthur's lips moving. He certainly was trying very hard. But soon he took his eyes off the book. His lips stopped moving. His look wandered everywhere, but not back to his book. Suddenly he caught my eye. I made a sign to him to go on with his lesson. He smiled, as though to thank me for reminding him, and again fixed his eyes on his book. But as before, he could not concentrate his thoughts. His eyes began to rove from first one side of the canal to the other. Just then a bird flew over the boat, swiftly as an arrow. Arthur raised his head to follow its flight. When it had passed he looked at me. "I can't learn this," he said, "and yet I want to." I went over to him. "It is not very difficult," I said. "Yes, it is. It's awfully difficult. It seems to me quite easy. I was listening while your mother read it, and I almost learned it myself." He smiled as though he did not believe it. "Do you want me to say it to you? You can't. Shall I try?" "You take the book." He took up the book again, and I began to recite the verse. I had it almost perfect. "What? You know it?" "Not quite, but next time I could say it without a mistake, I believe." "How did you learn it?" "I listened while your mother read it, but I listened attentively without looking about to see what was going on round about me." He reddened and turned away his eyes. "I will try like you," he said. "But tell me, what did you do to remember the words?" I did not quite know how to explain, but I tried my best. "What is the fable about?" I said. "Sheep." "Well, first of all, I thought of sheep. The sheep were in a field. I could see them lying down and sleeping in the field, picturing them so. I did not forget. Yes, yes," he said. "I can see them, black and white ones, in a green field. What looks after the sheep usually? Dogs, and a shepherd. If they thought the sheep were quite safe, what did they do? The dogs slept while the shepherd played his flute in the distance with the other shepherds." Little by little Arthur had the entire fable pictured in his mind's eye. I explained every detail, as well as I was able. When he was thoroughly interested we went over the lines together, and at the end of half an hour he had mastered it. "Oh, how pleased Mama will be!" he cried. When his mother came out she seemed displeased that we were together. She thought that we had been playing, but Arthur did not give her time to say a word. I know it, he cried. Remy has taught it to me. Mrs. Milligan looked at me in surprise. But before she could say a word, Arthur had commenced to recite the fable. I looked at Mrs. Milligan. Her beautiful face broke into a smile. Then I thought I saw tears in her eyes. But she bent her head quickly over her son and put her arms about him. I was not sure if she was crying. The words mean nothing, said Arthur. They are stupid, but the things that one sees. Remy made me see the shepherd with his flute, and the fields, and the dogs, and the sheep, then the wolves, and I could even hear the music that the shepherd was playing. Shall I sing the song to you, Mama? And he sang a little sad song in English. This time Mrs. Milligan did really cry, for when she got up from her seat, I saw that Arthur's cheeks were wet with her tears. Then she came to me and, taking my hand in hers, pressed it gently. You are a good boy, she said. The evening before I had been a little tramp, who had come on the barge with his animals to amuse a sick child, but this lesson drew me apart from the dogs and the monkey. I was, from now, a companion, almost a friend, to the sick boy. From that day, there was a change in Mrs. Milligan's manner toward me, and between Arthur and myself there grew a strong friendship. I never once felt the difference in our positions. This may have been due to Mrs. Milligan's kindness, for she often spoke to me as though I were her child. When the country was interesting we would go very slowly, but if the landscape was dreary, the horses would trot quickly along the towing path. When the sun went down the barge stopped. When the sun rose the barge started on again. If the evenings were damp we went into the little cabin and sat round a bright fire, so that the sick boy should not feel chilly, and Mrs. Milligan would read to us and show us pictures and tell us beautiful stories. Then, when the evenings were beautiful, I did my part. I would take my harp, and when the boat had stopped I would get off and go at a short distance and sit behind a tree. Then, hidden by the branches, I played and sang my best. On calm nights Arthur liked to hear the music without being able to see who played. And when I played his favorite airs, he would call out, "Encore!" and I would play the piece over again. That was a beautiful life for the country boy who had sat by Mother Barberin's fireside, and who had tramped the high roads with Signor Vitalis. What a difference between the dish of boiled potatoes that my poor foster mother had given me and the delicious tarts, jellies, and creams that Mrs. Milligan's cook made. What a contrast between the long tramps in the mud, the pouring rain, the scorching sun, trudging behind Vitalis, and this ride on the beautiful barge. The pastry was delicious. And yes, it was fine, oh so fine not to be hungry, nor tired, nor too hot, nor too cold, but in justice to myself, I must say that it was the kindness and love of this lady and this little boy that I felt the most. Twice I had been torn from those I loved, first from dear Mother Barberin, and then from Vitalis. I was left with only the dogs and the monkey, hungry and footsore, and then a beautiful lady, with a child of about my own age, had taken me in and treated me as though I were a brother. Often, as I looked at Arthur strapped to his bench, pale and drawn, I envied him. I, so full of health and strength, envied the little sick boy. It was not the luxuries that surrounded him that I envied, not the boat. It was his mother. Oh, how I wanted a mother of my own. She kissed him, and he was able to put his arms around her whenever he wished, this lady whose hand I scarcely dared touch when she held it out to me. And I thought sadly that I should never have a mother who would kiss me, and whom I could kiss. Perhaps one day I should see Mother Barberin again, and that would make me very happy, but I could not call her mother now, for she was not my mother. I was alone. I should always be alone. Nobody's boy. I was old enough to know that one should not expect to have too much from this world, and I thought that, as I had no family, no father or mother, I should be thankful that I had friends. And I was happy, so happy on that barge. But alas! It was not to last long. The day was drawing near for me to take up my old life again. Chapter 12. The Master's Consent. It was all to end, this beautiful trip that I had made on the barge. No nice bed, no nice pastry, no evenings listening to Mrs. Milligan. Ah! No Mrs. Milligan or Arthur. One day I decided to ask Mrs. Milligan how long it would take me to get back to Toulouse. I wanted to be waiting at the prison door when my master came out. When Arthur heard me speak of going back, he began to cry. "I don't want him to go. I don't want Rémi to go," he sobbed. I told him that I belonged to VITALIS, and that he had paid a sum of money for me, and that I must return to him the moment he wanted me. I had spoken of my foster parents, but had never said that they were not really my father and mother. I felt ashamed to admit that I was a foundling, a child picked up in the streets. I knew how the children from the Foundlings' Hospital had been scorned. It seemed to me that it was the most abject thing in the world to be a foundling. I did not want Mrs. Milligan and Arthur to know. Would they not have turned from me in disdain? "Mama, we must keep Rémi," continued Arthur. "I should be very pleased to keep Rémi with us," replied Mrs. Milligan. "We are so fond of him. But there are two things. First, Rémi would have to want to stay." "Oh, he does. He does," cried Arthur. "Don't you, Rémi? You don't want to go back to Toulouse? The second is," continued Mrs. Milligan, "will his master give him up? Rémi comes first. He comes first." Arthur insisted. VITALIS had been a good master, and I was very grateful for all he had taught me, but there was no comparison between my life with him and that which I should have with Arthur, and at the same time, there was also no comparison between the respect I had for VITALIS and the affection which I felt for Mrs. Milligan and her invalid boy. I felt that it was wrong for me to prefer these strangers to my master, but it was so. I loved Mrs. Milligan and Arthur. "If Rémi stays with us, it will not be all pleasure," went on Mrs. Milligan. "He would have to do lessons the same as you. He would have to study a great deal. It would not be the free life that he would have in going tramping along the roads. Ah, you know what I would like." I began. There, you see, Mama," interrupted Arthur. "All that we have to do now," continued Mrs. Milligan, "is to get his master's consent. I will write and ask him if he will come here, for we cannot return to Toulouse. I will send him his fare, and explain to him the reason why we cannot take the train. I'll invite him here, and I do hope he will accept. If he agrees to my proposition," added Mrs. Milligan, "I will then make arrangements with your parents, Rémi, for of course they must be consulted." "Consult my parents. They will tell her what I have been trying to keep secret, that I am a foundling. Then neither Arthur nor Mrs. Milligan would want me. A boy who did not know his own father or mother had been a companion to Arthur." I stared at Mrs. Milligan in affright. I did not know what to say. She looked at me in surprise. I did not dare reply to her question when she asked me what was the matter. Probably thinking that I was upset at the thought of my master coming, she did not insist. Arthur looked at me curiously all the evening. I was glad when bedtime came, and I could close myself in my cabin. That was my first bad night on board the Swan. What could I do? What say? Perhaps VITALIS would not give me up. Then they would never know the truth. My shame and fear of them finding out the truth was so great that I began to hope that VITALIS would insist upon me staying with him. 3 days later Mrs. Milligan received a reply to the letter she had sent VITALIS. He said that he would be pleased to come and see her, and that he would arrive the following Saturday by the 2 o'clock train. I asked permission to go to the station with the dogs and Pretty Heart to meet him. In the morning the dogs were restless as though they knew that something was going to happen. Pretty Heart was indifferent. I was terribly excited. My fate was to be decided. If I had possessed the courage, I would have implored VITALIS not to tell Mrs. Milligan that I was a foundling, but I felt that I could not utter the word, even to him. I stood on a corner of the railway station, holding my dogs on a leash, with Pretty Heart under my coat, and I waited. I saw little of what passed around me. It was the dogs who warned me that the train had arrived. They scented their master. Suddenly there was a tug at the leash. As I was not on my guard, they broke loose. With a bark they bounded forward. I saw them spring upon VITALIS. More sure, although less supple than the other two, Cappy had jumped straight into his master's arms, while Zerbino and Dulcie jumped at his feet. When VITALIS saw me, he put Cappy down quickly and threw his arms around me. For the first time he kissed me. "God bless you, my boy," he said again and again. My master had never been hard with me, but neither had he ever been affectionate. And I was not used to these effusions. I was touched, and the tears came to my eyes, for I was in the mood when the heart is easily stirred. I looked at him. His stay in prison had aged him greatly. His back was bent, his face paler, and his lips bloodless. "You find me changed, don't you, Rémi?" he said. "I was none too happy in prison, but I'll be better now I'm out." Then, changing the subject, he added, "Tell me about this lady who wrote to me. How did you get to know her?" I told him how I had met Mrs. Milligan and Arthur in their barge, the Swan, on the canal, and of what we had seen and what we had done. I rambled along hardly knowing what I said. Now that I saw VITALIS, I felt that it would be impossible to tell him that I wanted to leave him and stay with Mrs. Milligan. We reached the hotel where Mrs. Milligan was staying, before my story was ended. VITALIS had not mentioned what she had proposed to him in her letter, so I said nothing of her plan. "Is this lady expecting me?" he asked, as we entered the hotel. "Yes, I'll take you up to her apartment," I said. "There's no occasion for that," he replied. "I'll go up alone. You wait here for me with Pretty Heart and the dogs." I had always obeyed him, but in this case I felt that it was only fair for me to go up with him to Mrs. Milligan's apartment. But with a sign, he stopped the words on my lips, and I was forced to stay below with the dogs. Why didn't he want me to be present when he spoke to Mrs. Milligan? I asked myself this question again and again. I was still pondering over it when he returned. "Go and say goodbye to the lady," he said briefly. "I'll wait for you here. We shall go in 10 minutes. I was thunderstruck. "Well," he said, "didn't you understand me? You stand there like a stupid. Hurry up." He had never spoken so roughly to me. Mechanically I got up to obey, not seeming to understand. "What did you say to her?" I asked, after I had gone a few steps. "I said that I needed you, and that you needed me, and consequently I was not going to give up my rights to you." "Go, I give you 10 minutes to say goodbye." I was so possessed by the fact that I was a foundling that I thought that if I had to leave immediately it was because my master had told them about my birth. Upon entering Mrs. Milligan's apartment, I found Arthur in tears and his mother bending over him. "You won't go, Rémi? Oh, Rémi, tell me you won't go," he sobbed. I could not speak. Mrs. Milligan replied for me, telling Arthur that I had to do as I was told. "Signor VITALIS would not consent to let us have you," said Mrs. Milligan in a voice so sad. "He's a wicked man," cried Arthur. "No, he is not a wicked man," continued Mrs. Milligan. "He loves you, and he needs you. He speaks like a man far above his position. He told me, let me see, these were his words: 'I love that child, and he loves me. The apprenticeship in the life that I give him is good for him, better, far better, than he would have with you. You would give him an education, that is true, you would form his mind, but not his character. It is the hardships of life that alone can do that. He cannot be your son, he will be mine. That is better than to be a plaything for your sick child, however sweet he may be. I also will teach the boy, but he isn't Rémi's father," cried Arthur. "That is true, but he is his master, and Rémi belongs to him. For the time being, Rémi must obey him. His parents rented him to Signor VITALIS, but I will write to them and see what I can do." "Oh, no, no, don't do that," I cried. "What do you mean? "Oh no, please don't. But that is the only thing to do, my child. Oh, please, please don't." If Mrs. Milligan had not spoken of my parents, I should have taken much more than the 10 minutes to say goodbye that my master had given me. "They live in Chavanon, do they not?" asked Mrs. Milligan. Without replying, I went up to Arthur and, putting my arms round him, clung to him for a moment. Then, freeing myself from his weak clasp, I turned and held out my hand to Mrs. Milligan. "Poor child," she murmured, kissing me on the forehead. I hurried to the door. "Arthur, I will love you always," I said, choking back my sobs. "And I never will forget you, Mrs. Milligan, Rémi." "Rémi!" cried Arthur. I closed the door. 1 moment later I was with VITALIS. "Off we go," he said, and that was how I parted from my first boyfriend. Chapter 13. Weary dreary days. Again, I had to tramp behind my master with the harp strapped to my shoulder, through the rain, the sun, the dust, and the mud. I had to play the fool and laugh and cry in order to please the distinguished audience. More than once at our long walks I lagged behind to think of Arthur, his mother, and the swan. When I was in some dirty village, how I would long for my pretty cabin on the barge. And how rough the sheets were now. It was terrible to think that I should never again play with Arthur, and never hear his mother's voice. Fortunately, in my sorrow, which was very deep, I had one consolation. VITALIS was much kinder than he had ever been before. His manner with me had quite changed. I felt that he was more to me than a master now. Often, if I dared, I would have embraced him, I so needed love. But I had not the courage, for VITALIS was not a man with whom one dared be familiar. At first it had been fear that kept me at a distance, but now it was something vague, which resembled a sentiment of respect. When I left the village I had looked upon VITALIS the same as the other men of the poorer class. I was not able to make distinctions, but the 2 months that I had lived with Mrs. Milligan had opened my eyes and developed my intelligence. Looking at my master with more attention, it seemed to me that in manner and bearing he appeared to be very superior. His ways were like Mrs. Milligan's ways. Weeks passed. On our tramps, now, my eyes were always turned in the direction of the water, not to the hills. I was always hoping that one day I should see the swan. If I saw a boat in the distance, I always thought that it might be the swan. But it was not. We passed several days at Lyons, and all my spare time I spent on the docks, looking up and down the river. I described the beautiful barge to the fishermen and asked them if they had seen it, but no one had seen it. We had to leave Lyons at last and went on to Dijon. Then I began to give up hope of ever seeing Mrs. Milligan again, for at Lyons I had studied all the maps of France. And I knew that the swan could not go farther up the river to reach the Loire. It would branch off at Chalon. We arrived at Chalon, and we went on again without seeing it. It was the end of my dream. To make things worse, the winter was now upon us, and we had to tramp along wearily in the blinding rain and slush. At night, when we arrived at a wretched inn, or in a barn, tired out, wet to the skin, I could not drop off to sleep with laughter on my lips. Sometimes we were frozen to the bone, and Pretty Heart was as sad and mournful as myself. My master's object was to get to Paris as quickly as possible, for it was only in Paris that we had a chance to give performances during the winter. We were making very little money now, so we could not afford to take the train. After the cold sleet, the wind turned to the north. It had been very damp for several days. At first, we did not mind the biting north wind in our faces, but soon the sky filled with great black clouds, and the wintry sun disappeared altogether. We knew that a snowstorm was coming. VITALIS was anxious to get to the next big town, where we could stay and give several performances, if very bad weather overtook us. "Go to bed quickly," he said, when we got to an inn that night. "We are going to start at a very early hour tomorrow, because I don't want to be caught in a snowstorm." He did not go to bed at once. but sat down by a corner of the kitchen fire to warm Pretty Heart, who was suffering terribly from the cold. The monkey had not ceased moaning, although we had wrapped him up in plenty of coverlets. The next morning I got up early as I had been told. It was not yet day, the sky was lowering and black, and there was not a star to be seen. When we opened the door, a strong wind almost took us off our feet. "If I were in your place," said the innkeeper to Vitalis, "I wouldn't venture out. We're going to have a terrible snowstorm. I'm in a hurry," replied Vitalis, "and I want to get to Troyes before it comes on, 30 miles. Nevertheless, we started. Vitalis held Pretty Heart tight against his body, so as to give him some of his own warmth. And the dogs, pleased with the hard dry roads, raced before us. My master had bought a sheepskin for me at Dijon, and I wrapped myself up in it with the wool inside. It was anything but agreeable when we opened our mouths, so we walked along in silence, hurrying as much to get warm as to get ahead. Although it was long past the hour of daybreak, the sky was still quite black. Although to the east a whitish band cut the clouds, yet the sun would not come out. Looking across the country, objects were now becoming more distinct. We could see the trees stripped of their leaves, and the shrubs and bushes with dry foliage rustling and cracking with the heavy gusts of wind. There was no one on the roads, nor in the fields, not a sound of cartwheels, nor the crack of a whip. Suddenly, in the distance, we could see a pale streak which got larger and larger as it came towards us. Then we heard a sort of hissing murmur, the strange, harsh cry of the wild geese. The maddened flock flew over our heads, on they went, wildly fleeing from the north towards the south. Before they were out of sight, soft flakes were dropping gently from the skies and floating in the atmosphere. The country through which we tramped was desolate and bleak. The mournful aspect seemed to add to the silence. Only the shrill whistling of the north wind was heard. Snowflakes, like tiny butterflies, fluttered around us, whirling incessantly without touching the ground. We made little headway. It seemed impossible that we could reach Troyes before the storm was fully upon us. But I did not worry. I thought that if the snow fell it would not be so cold. I did not know what a snowstorm could be. It was not long before I learned, and in a way that I shall never forget. The clouds were gathering from the northwest. The flakes no longer hovered in the air, but fell straight and swift, covering us from head to foot. "We shall have to take shelter in the first house we come to," murmured Vitalis. "We cannot make Troyes." I was pleased to hear him say that, but where could we find shelter? As far as the eye could reach there was not a house to be seen, nor anything to indicate that we were nearing a village. Before us lay a forest with its dark depths, and on either side of us the hills. The snow came down faster and thicker. We tramped in silence. My master lifted his sheepskin now and again for Pretty Heart to breathe more easily. From time to time we had to turn our heads to one side, so that we also could breathe. The dogs no longer raced ahead. They walked at our heels asking for the shelter that we were unable to give them. We went slowly and painfully on, blinded, wet and frozen, and, although we were now in the heart of the forest, the road through it was exposed to the full wind. Several times I saw my master glance to the left, as though he were looking for something, but he said nothing. What did he hope to find? I looked straight before me, down the long road. As far as my eye could reach, I could see nothing but woods on either side. I thought we should never come to the end of that forest. I had seen the snow falling only through the window panes of a warm kitchen. How far off that warm kitchen seemed now. Our feet sunk into the white bed of snow, deeper and deeper. Then, suddenly, without saying a word, Vitalis pointed to the left. I looked and saw indistinctly a little hut made of branches. We had to find the track that led to the hut. This was difficult, for the snow was already thick enough to efface all trace of a path. We scrambled through the bushes, and after crossing a ditch, we managed at last to reach the hut and get inside. The dogs, in ecstasy, rolled over and over on the dry ground, barking, Our satisfaction was no less keen than theirs. "I thought there would be a woodcutter's cabin somewhere in the forest," said Vitalis. "Now it can snow, yes, let it snow," I said defiantly. "I don't care." I went to the door, or rather to the opening of the hut, for there was neither door nor window, and shook my coat and hat, so as not to wet the inside of our apartment. Our quarters were very simply but strongly built. Its furniture consisted of a heap of dirt and some big stones for seats. In a house like this, it was not difficult to find fuel. We had only to take it down from the walls and the roof, dragging out a few faggots here and there. This was quickly done, and soon we had a bright flaming fire. It is true that the hut was soon filled with smoke, but what did that matter? There was a flame, and it was heat that we wanted. I lay down, supporting myself on my 2 hands, and blew the fire. The dogs sat around the grate gravely. With necks stretched out, they presented their wet sides to the flames. Pretty Heart soon ventured to peep from under Vitalis' coat. Prudently putting the end of his nose outside, he looked about to take in his surroundings. Evidently satisfied, he jumped quickly to the ground, and taking the best place before the fire, he held out his 2 little trembling hands to the flames. That morning before I had risen, Vitalis had packed some provisions. There was some bread and a piece of cheese. We all expressed satisfaction at the sight of the food. Unfortunately, we were only able to have a very small piece, for not knowing how long we should have to stay in the hut, Vitalis thought it advisable to keep some for supper. I understood, but the dogs did not, and when they saw the bread put back in the bag before they had scarcely eaten, they held out their paws to their master, scratching his neck, and performing pantomime gestures to make him open the bag upon which their eyes were fixed. But Vitalis took no notice of them. The bag was not opened. The dogs settled themselves to go to sleep, Cappy with his nose in the cinders. I thought that I would follow their example. I do not know how long I slept. When I awoke, the snow had stopped falling. I looked outside. It was very deep. If we ventured out, it would come above our knees. What time was it? I could not ask Vitalis. His big silver watch, by which Cappy had told the hour, had been sold. He had spent all his money to pay his prison fine, and when he bought my sheepskin at Dijon, he had parted with his big watch to pay for it. From the misty atmosphere, it was impossible for me to tell what hour it might be. There was not a sound to be heard. The snow seemed to have petrified every movement of life. I was standing in the opening of our cabin when I heard my master calling. "Do you want to get on your way?" he asked. "I don't know. I want to do what you wish." "Well, I think we ought to stay here. We are at least sheltered and have warmth." That was true, but I remembered that we had no food. However, I said nothing. "I'm afraid it will snow again," continued Vitalis. "We don't want to spend the night outside. Better stay here." Yes, we should have to stay in the hut and tighten our belts round our stomachs. That was all. At supper, Vitalis divided the remainder of the bread. Alas, there was but little, and it was quickly eaten. We gobbled up every crumb. When our frugal supper was over, I thought that the dogs would begin making signs for more as they had done before, for they were ravenous. But they did nothing of the kind, and once again I realized how great was their intelligence. When Vitalis thrust his knife into his trouser pocket, which indicated that the feast was over, Cappy got up and smelled the bag in which the food was kept. He then placed his paw on the bag to feel it. This double investigation convinced him that there was nothing left to eat. Then, coming back to his place before the fire, he looked at Zerbino and Dulcie. The look clearly signified that they would get nothing more. Then he stretched himself out his entire length with a sigh of resignation. "There is nothing more. It is useless to beg." He said this to them as plainly as though he had spoken aloud. His companions, understanding this language, also stretched out before the fire sighing, but Zerbino's sigh in no wise betokened resignation, for added to a large appetite, Zerbino was very much of a gourmand, and this was a greater sacrifice for him than for the others. The snow had commenced to fall again. It fell persistently. We could see the white carpet on the ground rise higher and higher until the small shrubs and bushes were hidden beneath it. When night came, big flakes were still falling from the black sky onto the shimmering earth. As we had to sleep there, the best thing to do was to go to sleep as quickly as possible. I wrapped myself up in my sheepskin, which I had dried by the fire during the day, and I laid down beside the fire, my head on a flat stone which served for a pillow. "You go to sleep," said VITALIS. "I'll wake you when it's my turn, for although we have nothing to fear from animals or people in this cabin, one of us must keep awake to see that the fire does not go out. We must be careful not to get cold, for it will be bitter when the snow stops." I slept. In the small hours of the night my master woke me. The fire was still burning, and the snow had stopped falling. "It's my turn to sleep now," said VITALIS. "As the fire goes down you throw on this wood that I've got already here." He had piled up a heap of small wood by the grate. My master, who slept much lighter than I, did not wish me to wake him by pulling down the wood from the walls each time I needed it. So from this heap that he had prepared, I could take the wood and throw on the fire without making a noise. It was a wise thing to do, but alas, VITALIS did not know what the result would be. He stretched out now before the fire with Pretty Heart in his coverlet cuddled up against him, and soon, from his deep breathing, I knew that he had fallen asleep. Then I got up softly and went to the opening to see how it looked outside. All the grass, the bushes, and the trees were buried in snow. Everywhere the eye rested was a dazzling white. The sky was dotted with twinkling stars, but although they were so bright, it was the snow which shed the pale light over the earth. It was much colder now. It was freezing hard. Oh, what should we have done in the depths of the forest in the snow and the cold if we had not found this shelter? Although I had walked on tiptoe to the opening without scarcely making a sound, I had roused the dogs, and Zerbino had followed me. The splendor of the night was nothing to him. He looked on the scene for a moment, and then became bored and wanted to go outside. I ordered him to return to his place. "Foolish dog, wasn't it better to stay by the warm fire in this terrible cold than to go prowling around?" He obeyed me, but with a very bad grace, and kept his eyes fixed on the entrance. I stayed there for a few minutes longer, looking at the white night. It was beautiful, but although I enjoyed it, somehow I felt a vague sadness. I could have gone inside and not looked, of course, but the white, mysterious scene held me fascinated. At last I went back to the fire, and having placed 2 or 3 long pieces of wood crossways upon one another, I sat down on the stone which had served me for a pillow. My master was sleeping calmly. The dogs and Pretty Heart also slept, and the flames leaped from the fire and swirled upward to the roof, throwing out bright sparks. The spluttering flame was the only sound that broke the silence of the night. For a long time I watched the sparks, then little by little I began to get drowsy. Without my being aware, if I had been compelled to busy myself with getting the wood, I could have kept awake, but seated before the fire with nothing to do, I became so sleepy, and yet all the time I thought that I could manage to keep awake, I sprang up suddenly, awakened by a violent barking. It was night. I probably had slept for a long time, and the fire was almost out. No flames lit the hut now. Cappy was barking loudly, furiously. But strange, there was no sound from Zerbino or Dulcie. "What's the matter?" cried VITALIS, waking up. "I don't know. You've been to sleep, and the fire's gone out." Cappy had run to the opening, but had not ventured outside. He stood on the threshold barking. "What has happened?" I asked in my turn. In answer to Cappy's barks came 2 or 3 mournful howls. I recognized Dulce's voice. These howls came from behind our hut, and at a very short distance. I was going out, but VITALIS put his hand on my shoulder and stopped me. "First," he said, in a tone of command. "Put some wood on the fire." While I obeyed, he took a sprig from the fire and blew it out until only the point remained burning. He held the torch in his hand. "Come and see what is the matter," he said. "You walk behind me." "Go ahead, Cappy." As we went out, there was a frightful howl. Cappy drew back, cowering behind us in terror. "Wolves! Where are Zerbino and Dulcie?" What could I say? The two dogs must have gone out while I slept. Zerbino had waited until I was asleep and had then crept out, and Dulcie had followed him. The wolves had got hold of them. There was fear in my master's voice when he asked for the dogs. "Take a torch," he said. "We must go to their aid." In our village, I had heard them tell terrible stories of wolves, yet I could not hesitate. I ran back for a torch, then followed my master. But outside, we could see neither dogs nor wolves. On the snow, we could see only the imprint of the two dogs' paws. We followed these traces around the hut. Then at a certain distance, we could see a space in the snow which looked as though some animals had been rolling in it. "Go and look for them, Cappy," said my master. At the same time he whistled to attract Zerbino and Dulcie. But there was no barking in reply. No sound disturbed the mournful silence of the forest, and Cappy, instead of running off as he was told, kept close to us, giving every sign of fear. Cappy, who was usually so obedient and brave. There was not sufficient light for us to follow the imprints any distance. The snow around us was dazzling, but beyond seemed all vague and obscure. Again VITALIS whistled and shouted for the missing dogs. There was no answering bark. "Oh, poor Zerbino, poor Dulcie." "The wolves have got them," said VITALIS. "Why did you let them go out?" "Yes." "Why?" I had nothing to say. "We must go and look for them," I said after a pause. I went before him, but he stopped me. "Where will you look for them?" he asked. "I don't know. Everywhere. We can't tell, in this dim light, where they have gone." That was true, and the snow came up above our knees. Our two torches together could not penetrate the shadows. "If they do not reply, it is because they are a long way off," he said. "We must not go on. The wolves might attack us also. We cannot defend ourselves." It was dreadful to have to leave the poor dogs to their fate, our two friends particularly to me. And the terrible part of it was that I knew that I was responsible. If I had not slept, they would not have gone out. My master had turned back to the hut. I followed, looking back at each step, stopping to listen. I heard nothing, and saw nothing but the snow. When we reached the hut, another surprise awaited us. The branches that I had thrown on the fire were aflame and lit up the darkest corners of the cabin, but Pretty Heart was nowhere to be seen. His coverlets were there before the fire, but he was not in them. I called. VITALIS called, but he did not appear. My master said that when he awoke the monkey was beside him, so it was while we were out that he had disappeared. With our burning torches held down to the snowy earth, we started out to look for him. We found no trace of him. We returned to the hut to see if he were hidden behind some faggots. We searched for a long time. 10 times we looked in the same place, the same corners. I climbed up on VITALI's shoulders to look amongst the branches of which the roof was made. We called again and again, but there was no answer. VITALIS seemed angry. I was in despair. I asked my master if he thought that the wolves could have taken him also. "No," he said. "The wolves would not dare come into the hut. I am afraid they got Zerbino and Dulcie when they went out, but they did not come in here. It is quite likely that Pretty Heart was terrified and has hidden himself somewhere while we were outside. That is why I am so anxious. In this terrible weather he will catch cold, and cold is fatal for him. Well, let us keep on looking." We went over the ground again, but all in vain. "We must wait till day," said VITALIS. "When will it be day? In 2 or 3 hours, I think." VITALIS sat down before the fire, with his head in his hands. I did not dare disturb him. I stood quite close to him, only moving occasionally to put some branches on the fire. Once or twice he got up and went to the door. He looked at the sky, listened attentively, then came back and sat down. I would rather that he had been angry with me than that he should be so silent and sad. The 3 hours passed slowly. It seemed that the night would never end. The stars were fading from the heavens. The sky was getting lighter. Day was breaking. But as morning came, the cold grew more intense. The air which came through the door froze us to the bone. If we did find Pretty Heart, would he be alive? The snow had quite stopped falling now, and there was a pinkish light in the sky which foretold fine weather. As soon as it was quite light, VITALIS and I, armed with a stout stick, left the hut. Cappy did not appear so terrified as he had been the night before. With his eyes fixed on his master, he only waited for a sign from him to rush forward. As we were examining the ground for Pretty Heart's footprints, Cappy threw back his head and began to bark joyfully. He signified that we must look up, not on the ground. In the great oak standing by the hut we found him. Poor Pretty Heart! Frightened by the howling of the dogs, he had jumped onto the roof of the cabin when we had gone out, and from there he had climbed to the top of an oak, where, feeling that he was in a safe place, he had remained crouching without replying to our calls. The poor little frail creature! He must be frozen. My master called him gently. He did not move. We thought that he was already dead. For several minutes VITALIS continued to call him, but the monkey gave no sign of life. My heart ached with remorse. How severely I was being punished. I must atone. "I'll go up and get him," I said. "You'll break your neck." "No, there is no danger. I can do it easily." That was not true. There was danger. It was very difficult, for the large tree was covered with ice and snow. When I was quite small, I had learned to climb trees, and I was quite an adept in this art. I jumped and caught hold of the lowest branches. I held on to these, and, although blinded by the snow that fell in my eyes, I managed to climb up the trunk to the stronger branches. Once up there, I had only to be careful not to lose my footing. As I climbed, I spoke softly to Pretty Heart. He did not move, but looked at me with shining eyes. I had almost reached him, and was about to stretch out my hand, when, with a spring, he had jumped to another branch. I followed him to this branch, but men, alas, and even youngsters are very inferior to monkeys when it comes to climbing trees. It is quite possible that I should never have caught him if the snow had not wet his feet. He did not like this, and soon got tired of dodging me. Then, letting himself drop from branch to branch, he jumped straight onto his master's shoulders and hid himself inside his coat. It was a great thing to have found Pretty Heart, but that was not all. Now we had to look for the dogs. It was day now, and easy for us to see what had happened. In the snow, we read the death of our dogs. We followed their footprints for 30 yards. They had come out of the hut, one behind the other, Dulcie following Zerbino. Then we saw other footprints. On one side there were signs of a struggle where the wolves had sprung upon the dogs, and on the other sides were the footprints of the wolves where they trotted off, carrying their prey with them, to be devoured at their leisure. There was no trace of the dogs except a red trail of blood which here and there stained the snow. The 2 poor dogs had gone to their death while I slept. We had to get busy as quickly as possible with warming Pretty Heart. We hurried back to the hut. While VITALIS held out the little creature's feet and hands to the fire, as one holds a tiny baby, I warmed his coverlets and we rolled him up in them. But he needed more than the coverlets. He needed a warm drink. My master and I sat by the fire, silent, watching the wood burn. "Poor Zerbino, poor Dulcie." Each of us murmured these words, first he, then I. The dogs had been our friends, our companions, in good and bad fortune, and to me in my loneliness they had meant so much. How deeply I reproached myself for not having kept watch. The wolves would not have come to attack us in our cabin. They would have stayed in the distance, frightened by the fire. If only Vitalis would have scolded me. I wished that he would beat me. But he said nothing. He did not even look at me. He sat with his head bent over the fire, probably wondering what would become of us without the dogs. Chapter 14. The Death of Pretty Heart. The sun came out brightly. Its rays fell on the white snow, and the forest, which the night before had looked so bleak and livid, was now dazzling with a radiancy that blinded the eyes. Several times Vitalis passed his hand under the coverlet to feel Pretty Heart, but the poor little monkey did not get warmer, and when I bent over him I could hear him shivering and shaking. The blood in his veins was frozen. "We must get to a village or Pretty Heart will die," said Vitalis. "Let us start at once." His wrappings were well heated, and the little creature was rolled in them. My master placed him under his vest, next his heart. We were ready. "This was a shelter," said Vitalis, looking around the hut as we were going out. "That has made us pay dearly for its hospitality." His voice trembled. He went out first, and I followed in his footsteps. When we had gone a few yards, we had to call to Cappy. Poor dog, he had remained standing outside the hut, his nose turned to the spot where his companions had been taken by the wolves. 10 minutes later, we reached the main road. We passed a cart. The driver told us that within an hour we should reach a village. This was encouraging, yet it was difficult, even painful, to walk. The snow came up to my waist. Many times I asked Vitalis after Pretty Heart. Each time he told me that he was still shivering. At last we saw the white roofs of a fair-sized village. We were not in the habit of putting up at the better-class inns. We always chose a poor place, where we were sure we should not be driven away, and where they would not take all we had. But this time Vitalis went into an inn where a beautiful sign hung outside the kitchen door. The door was open, and we could see the great stove covered with shining copper saucepans, from which the steam was rising. Ah, how good that soup smelled to the famished wanderers! My master, putting on his most gentlemanly airs, and with his hat on his head and his head thrown back, asked the landlady for a good bed and a fire. At first the landlady, who was a fine-looking woman, had not condescended to notice us, but Vitalis' grand manner evidently impressed her. She spoke to a maid and told her to take us up to a room. "Quick, get into bed," said Vitalis, while the servant was lighting the fire. I looked at him in astonishment. Why go to bed? I would rather sit down and eat something than go to bed. "Quick, hurry up," repeated Vitalis. There was nothing to do but to obey. There was an eiderdown quilt on the bed. Vitalis pulled it right up to my chin. "Try and get warm," he said. "The warmer you are, the better." It seemed to me that Pretty Heart needed warming much more than I, because I was not very cold now, while I laid still under the eiderdown trying to get warm. Vitalis, to the servant's astonishment, turned little Pretty Heart round and round before the fire, as though he were going to roast him. "Are you warm?" Vitalis asked me after a few minutes. "I'm suffocating. That's right." He came to the bed quickly. He put Pretty Heart in, telling me to hold him close to my chest. The poor little animal, who always rebelled when he was made to do something that he did not want, seemed resigned to everything. He let me hold him close to my body without making a movement. But he was not cold now, his body was burning. My master, who had gone down to the kitchen, soon returned, carrying a bowl of well-sweetened wine. He tried to make Pretty Heart drink a few spoonfuls, but the poor little creature could not unclench his teeth. With his brilliant eyes, he looked at us imploringly, as though to ask us not to torment him. Then he drew one arm from under the covers and held it out to us. I wondered what he meant. I looked inquiringly at Vitalis, who explained, before I had met them, Pretty Heart had had inflammation of the lungs, and they had had to bleed him, taking the blood from his arm. Knowing that he was sick now, he wanted us to bleed him, so that he could get better as before. Poor little monkey. VITALIS was touched to the heart, and this made him still more anxious. It was evident that Pretty Heart was ill, and he must be very ill indeed to refuse the sugared wine that he liked so much. "Drink the wine, Rémi, and stay in bed," said VITALIS. "I'll go for a doctor." I must admit that I also liked sugared wine, and besides I was very hungry. I did not let him tell me twice to drink it. After I had emptied the bowl, I slid down under the eiderdown again, where the heat, aided by the wine, nearly suffocated me. VITALIS was not gone long. He soon returned, bringing with him a gentleman wearing gold-rimmed spectacles, the doctor. Thinking that the doctor might not put himself out for a monkey, VITALIS had not told him who was his patient. When he saw me in bed, as red as a tomato, the doctor put his hand on my forehead and said at once, "Congestion." He shook his head with an air which augured nothing good. Anxious to undeceive him for fear he might bleed me, I cried, "Why, I'm not ill, not ill. Why, the child is delirious." I lifted the quilt a bit and showed him Pretty Heart, who had placed his little arm round my neck. "He's the one that's ill," I said. "A monkey," he explained, turning angrily to VITALIS. "You brought me out in such weather to see a monkey." Our master was a smart man who was not easily ruffled. Politely, and with his grand air, he stopped the doctor. Then he explained the situation, how he had been caught in a snowstorm, and how through fear of the wolves Pretty Heart had jumped up in an oak tree, where he had been almost frozen to death. The patient might be only a monkey, but what a genius! And what a friend and companion to us! How could we confide such a wonderful, talented creature to the care of a simple veterinary surgeon? Everyone knew that the village veterinary was an ass, while everyone knew that doctors were scientific men, even in the smallest village. If one rings at a door which bears a doctor's name, one is sure to find a man of knowledge and of generosity. Although the monkey is only an animal, according to naturalists, they are so near like men that often an illness is treated the same for one as for the other. And was it not interesting, from a scientific point of view, to study how these illnesses differed? The doctor soon returned from the door where he had been standing. Pretty Heart, who had probably guessed that this person wearing the spectacles was a physician, again pushed out his arm. "Look!" cried VITALIS. "He wants you to bleed him." That settled the doctor. "Most interesting, a very interesting case," he murmured. Alas! After examining him, the doctor told us that poor little Pretty Heart again had inflammation of the lungs. The doctor took his arm and thrust a lancet into a vein without him making the slightest moan. Pretty Heart knew that this ought to cure him. After the bleeding he required a good deal of attention. I, of course, had not stayed in bed. I was the nurse, carrying out VITALIS' instructions. Poor little Pretty Heart! He liked me to nurse him. He looked at me and smiled sadly. His look was quite human. He, who was usually so quick and petulant, always playing tricks on one of us, was now quiet and obedient. In the days that followed he tried to show us how friendly he felt towards us, even to Cappy, who had so often been the victim of his tricks. As in the usual trend of inflammation of the lungs, he soon began to cough. The attacks tired him greatly, for his little body shook convulsively. All the money which I had, 5 sous, I spent on sugar sticks for him, but they made him worse instead of better. With his keen instinct, he soon noticed that every time he coughed I gave him a little piece of sugar stick. He took advantage of this and coughed every moment in order to get the remedy that he liked so much. And this remedy, instead of curing him, made him worse. When I found out this trick, I naturally stopped giving him the candy, but he was not discouraged. First he begged for it with an appealing look, then when he saw that I would not give it to him, he sat up in his seat and bent his little body with his hand on his stomach, and coughed with all his might. The veins in his forehead stood out, the tears ran from his eyes, and his pretense at choking, in the end, turned to a dreadful attack over which he had no control. I had to stay at the inn with Pretty Heart while my master went out alone. One morning upon his return, he told me that the landlady had demanded the sum that we owed her. This was the first time that he had ever spoken to me about money. It was quite by chance that I had learned that he had sold his watch to buy my sheepskin. Now he told me that he had only 50 sous left. The only thing to do, he said, was to give a performance that same day. A performance without Zerbino, Dulcie, or Pretty Heart? Why, that seemed to me impossible. "We must get 40 francs at once," he said. "Pretty Heart must be looked after. We must have a fire in the room, and medicine, and the landlady must be paid. If we pay her what we owe her, she will give us another credit." 40 francs in this village, in the cold, and with such poor resources at our command, while I stayed at home with Pretty Heart. Vitalis found a hall in the public market, for an out-of-door performance was out of the question. He wrote the announcements and stuck them up all over the village. With a few planks of wood he arranged a stage, and bravely spent his last 50 sous to buy some candles, which he cut in half so as to double the lights. From the window of our room, I saw him come and go, tramping back and forth in the snow. I wondered anxiously what program he could make. I was soon enlightened on this subject, for along came the town crier of the village, wearing a scarlet cap, and stopped before the inn. After a magnificent roll of his drum, he read out our program. Vitalis had made the most extravagant promises. There was to be present a world-renowned artist, that was Cappy, and a young singer who was a marvel. The marvel was myself. But the most interesting part of the farce was that there was no fixed price for the entertainment. We relied upon the generosity of the audience, and the public need not pay until after it had seen, heard, and applauded. That seemed to me extraordinarily bold. Who was going to applaud us? Cappy certainly deserved to be celebrated, but I was not at all convinced that I was a marvel. Although Pretty Heart was very ill at this moment, when he heard the drum, he tried to get up. From the noise and Cappy's barks, he seemed to guess that it was to announce our performance. I had to force him back on his bed. Then he made signs to me to give him his general's uniform, the red coat and trousers with gold braid, and hat with the plume. He clasped his hands and went down on his knees to beg me. When he saw that he could get nothing from me by begging, he tried what anger would do. Then finally melted into tears. It was evident that we should have a great deal of trouble to convince him that he must give up all idea of playing that night. I thought it would be better not to let him know when we started. When Vitalis returned, he told me to get my harp ready and all the things we required for the entertainment. Pretty Heart, who knew what this meant, turned to his master and commenced his entreaties again. He could not have better expressed his desires than by the sounds he uttered, the twisting of his face, and the turns of his body. There were real tears on his cheeks, and they were real kisses that he imprinted on Vitalis' hand. "You want to play?" asked Vitalis, who had not been told what happened before. "Yes, oh yes." Pretty Heart's whole person seemed to cry out. He tried to jump to show that he was no longer sick. We know very well that if we took him out it would be his death. It was time for us to start. Before going, I made up a good fire and wrapped Pretty Heart up in his coverlets. He cried again and embraced me as much as he could. Then we started. As we tramped through the snow, my master told me what he expected of me. We could not, of course, give our usual repertoire, as our principal actors were missing, but Cappy and I could vie with each other in doing our best. We had to collect 40 francs. 40 francs. It was terrible. Impossible. Vitalis had prepared everything. All we had to do now was to light the candles, but this was an extravagance that we could not indulge in until the room was filled, for our illuminations would not have to come to an end before our entertainment. Whilst we took possession of our theater, the town crier, with his drum, came through the village streets for the last time. After I addressed Cappy and myself, I went outside and stood behind a pillar to watch the people arrive. The roll of the drum became louder. It was approaching the marketplace, and I could hear a babble of voices. Behind the drum came a score of youngsters, all keeping step, without stopping the beating of his drum. The town crier took up his place between the two large lamps that were lit at the entrance of our theater. The public had only to walk in and take their seats for the performance to commence. Alas! How long they were coming, and yet the drum at the door continued gaily its rat-ta-ta-ta. All the boys in the village must have been there. But it was not the youngsters who were likely to give us 40 francs. There would have to be some important people, open-handed and generous. At last VITALIS decided that we ought to commence, although the hall was far from being full, but we could not wait longer, worried as we were by the terrible question of candles. I had to appear first and sing a few songs, accompanying myself on the harp. I must confess the applause that I received was very weak. I had never thought very much of myself as an entertainer, but the marked coolness with which the audience received my efforts discouraged me. If I did not please them, they would certainly not give us anything. It was not for the glory that I was singing, it was for poor Pretty Heart. Ah, how I wanted to stir this public, to make them enthusiastic. But I could see only too well that they did not consider me a marvel. Cappy was more successful. He received several encores. Thanks to Cappy, the entertainment ended in a burst of applause. Not only did they clap their hands, but they stamped their feet. The decisive moment had arrived. While Cappy, with the cup in his jaws, ran through the audience, I danced a Spanish dance on the stage, with VITALIS playing an accompaniment. Would Cappy collect 40 francs? That was the question which made my heart beat while I smiled at the public in my pleasantest manner. I was out of breath, but I still continued to dance, for I was not to stop until Cappy had returned. He did not hurry himself. When he found that he did not receive a coin, he placed his paw against the person's pocket. At last I saw him about to return, and thought that I might stop, but VITALIS made me a sign to go on. I continued to dance, and going a few steps nearer Cappy, I saw that the cup was not full, far from it. VITALIS had also seen this. Bowing to the audience, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I think that, without flattering ourselves, we have conscientiously carried out our program, yet as our candles are still burning, I will, if the public wishes, sing some songs myself. Our dog, Cappy, will make another quest, and those who have not yet given will perhaps give this time. Please have your money ready." Although VITALIS had been my teacher, I had never really heard him sing, or at least not as he sung that evening. He selected 2 songs, an air from Joseph and one from Richard the Lion-Hearted. Although I was only a little boy and was no judge as to whether one sang with technique or without, VITALIS' singing stirred me strangely. I went into a corner of the stage, for my eyes filled with tears as I listened to his beautiful notes. Through a mist, I saw a young lady, who occupied the first row, clap her hands with all her might. I had already noticed that she was not a peasant like the rest of the people in the hall. She was a lady, young and beautiful, and from her handsome fur coat, I took her to be the richest woman in the village. She had with her a little child who had applauded Cappy heartily. It was probably her son, for the likeness was striking. After the first song, Cappy went the round again. I saw with surprise that the lady had not put anything into his cup. When my master had finished the air from the second opera, she beckoned me to her. "I want to speak to that gentleman," she said. I was surprised. I thought she would have done better to have dropped something into the cup. Cappy returned. He had collected very little more on this second round. "What does the lady want?" asked VITALIS. "To speak to you. I have nothing to say. She did not give anything to Cappy. Perhaps she would like to give it now. Then it is for Cappy to go to her, not for me." However, he decided to go, and took the dog with him. I followed them. By now a servant had appeared, carrying a lantern and a rug. He stood beside the lady and the child. Vitalis bowed coldly to her. "Forgive me for having disturbed you," she said, "but I wanted to congratulate you." Vitalis bowed, without saying a word. "I am a musician," continued the lady. "I am telling you this so that you will know how much I appreciate your superb talent." Superb talent? My master? The dog trainer? I was amazed. "An old man like me has no talent," he replied coldly. "Do not think that I am inquisitive, but—" began the lady. "I am quite willing to satisfy your curiosity, madam," he said. "You are surprised that a dog trainer is able to sing a little. But I have not always been what I am now. When I was younger, I was the servant of a great singer, and like a parrot, I imitated him. I began to repeat some of the songs he practiced in my presence. That is all." The lady did not reply. She looked hard at Vitalis. He seemed embarrassed. "Goodbye, sir," she said at last, laying a stress on the word. "Sir. Goodbye, and once more let me thank you for the exquisite delight you have given me this evening." And leaning towards Capi, she dropped a gold piece in his cup. I thought that Vitalis would escort her to the door, but he did nothing of the kind, and when she was out of hearing I heard him swear softly in Italian. She gave Capi a louis. I said, I thought he was going to give me a blow, but he let his raised hand fall to his side. "A louis," he said, as though he were coming out of a dream. "Ah, yes, poor pretty heart. I had forgotten him. Let us go back to the little creature at once." I climbed the stairs of the inn first, and went into the room. The fire was not out, but there were no flames. I lit a candle quickly. I was surprised not to hear any sound from Pretty Heart. I found him, lying under his coverlets, stretched out his full length, dressed in his general's uniform. He appeared to be asleep. I leaned over him and took his hand gently to wake him up. His hand was cold. Vitalis came into the room. I turned to him. "Pretty Heart is cold," I said. My master came to my side and also leaned over the bed. "He is dead," he said. "It was to be. Ah, Rémi, boy, I did wrong to take you away from Mrs. Milligan. I am punished. Zerbino, Dulcie, and now Pretty Heart, and this is not the end." Chapter 15. Faithful friends, we were still a long way from Paris. We had to go by roads covered with snow, and walk from morning till night, the north wind blowing in our faces. How sad and weary were those long tramps. Vitalis walked ahead, I at his heels, and Capi behind me. Thus in line we went onward without exchanging a word, for hours and hours, faces blue with cold, feet wet, stomachs empty. The people who passed us on the way turned round to gaze at us. Evidently they thought it strange. Where was this old man leading his child and the dog? The silence seemed terrible to me, and so sad. I would like to have talked just for company, but when I did venture to make a remark, Vitalis replied briefly, without even turning his head. Fortunately, Capi was more sociable, and as I trudged along I often felt his warm tongue on my hand. He licked me as much as to say, "Your friend, Capi, is here with you." Then I stroked him gently, without stopping. We understood each other, we loved each other. On the slippery snow we went straight ahead, without stopping, sleeping at night in a stable or in a sheepfold, with a piece of bread, alas, very small, for our meal in the evening. This was our dinner and supper in one. We did not tell the shepherds that we were dying of hunger, but Vitalis, with his usual cleverness, would say insinuatingly that the little chap was very fond of sheep's milk, because, when he was a baby, he used to drink it. This story did not always take effect, but it was a good night for me when it did. Yes, I was very fond of sheep's milk, and when they gave me some I felt much stronger the next day. It seemed strange to me that, as we neared Paris, the country ceased to be beautiful. The snow was not white and dazzling now. I had heard what a wonderful place Paris was, and I expected something extraordinary. I did not know exactly what. I should not have been surprised to see trees of gold, streets of marble, palaces everywhere. What were we poor things going to do when we reached Paris? I wanted to question Vitalis, but I did not dare. He seemed so gloomy. When we were inside of the roofs and the church towers of the capital, he slackened his step to walk beside me. "Rémi," he said suddenly, "we are going to part when we get to Paris." I looked at him. He looked at me. The sudden pallor of my face and the trembling of my lips told him what effect his words had on me. For a moment I could not speak. "Going to part," I murmured at last. "Poor little chap, yes, we must part." The tone in which he said this brought the tears to my eyes. It was so long since I had heard a kind word. "Oh, you are so good," I cried. "It is you who are good. You brave little heart. There comes a time in one's life when one feels these things. When all goes well, one goes along through life without thinking much who is with one, but when things go wrong, when one is on the wrong track, and above all when one is old, one wants to lean on somebody. You may be surprised that I have wanted to lean on you. And yet it is so. But only to see that your eyes are moist as you listen to me comforts me, little Rémi. I am very unhappy." I did not know what to say. I just stroked his hand. "And the misfortune is that we have to part just at the time when we are getting nearer to each other. But you're not going to leave me all alone in Paris?" I asked timidly. "No, certainly not. What would you do in the big city, all by yourself, poor child? I have no right to leave you. Remember that. The day when I would not let the good lady take you and bring you up as her son, that day I bound myself to do the best I could for you. I can do nothing at this moment, and that is why I think it is best to part. It is only for a time. We can do better if we separate during the last months of the bad season. What can we do in Paris with all gone but Cappy?" Hearing his name mentioned, dear Cappy came beside us. He put his paw to his ear in military salute, then placed it on his heart, as though to tell us that we could count on his devotion. My master stopped to pass his hand affectionately over the dog's head. "Yes, Cappy, you're a good, faithful friend, but alas, without the others we can't do much now. But my harp, if I had 2 children like you it would be better. But an old man with just one little boy is bad business. I am not old enough. Now, if I were only blind or broken down. I am not in a pitiful state enough for people to stop and notice us. So, my boy, I have decided to give you to a padrone until the end of the winter. He will take you with other children that he has, and you will play your harp. And you?" I asked. "I am known in Paris. I have stayed there several times. I will give violin lessons to the Italian children who play on the streets. I have only to say that I will give lessons to find all the pupils I want. And in the meantime, I will train 2 dogs that will replace poor Zerbino and Dulcie. Then in the spring, we will be together again, my little Rémi. We are only passing through a bad time now. Later, I will take you through Germany and England. Then you will grow big and your mind will develop. I will teach you a lot of things and make a man of you. I promised this to Mrs. Milligan. I will keep my promise. That is the reason why I have already commenced to teach you English. You can speak French and Italian. That is something for a child of your age." Perhaps it was all for the best, as my master said, but I could only think of 2 things. We were to be parted, and I was to have a padrone. During our wanderings I had met several padrones who used to beat the children who worked for them. They were very cruel, and they swore, and usually they were drunk. Would I belong to one of those terrible men? And then, even if fate gave me a kind master, it was another change. First, my foster mother, then Vitalis, then another. Was it to be always so? Should I never find anyone that I could love and stay with always? Little by little, I had grown attached to Vitalis. He seemed almost what I thought a father would be. Should I never have a father, have a family? Always alone in this great world. Nobody's boy. Vitalis had asked me to be brave. I did not wish to add to his sorrows, but it was hard, so hard to leave him. As we walked down a dirty street, with heaps of snow on either side covered with cinders and rotten vegetables, I asked, "Where are we?" "In Paris, my boy." Where were my marble houses? And the trees of gold, and the finely dressed people? Was this Paris? Was I to spend the winter in a place like this, parted from Vitalis and Cappy? Chapter 16. The Padrone. Although I knew later how beautiful was the city of Paris, the slums, being my first glimpse, created anything but a favorable impression. Vitalis, who seemed to know his way, pushed through the groups of people who obstructed his passage along the narrow street we had just turned down. "Mind, you don't lose me," cautioned Vitalis. But his warning was not necessary, for I trod upon his heels, and to be more sure of him, I held a corner of his coat in my hand. We crossed a big courtyard to a dirty, dismal house where surely the sun had never penetrated. It was the worst-looking place I had seen so far. "Is Garofoli in?" asked Vitalis of a man who, by the light from a lantern, was hanging rags against the door. "I don't know. Go up and see for yourself," he growled. "The door's at the top of the stairs. It faces you. Garofoli is the Padrone, Rémi, I told you about," said Vitalis. "This is where he lives." The street, the house, the staircase was not in the nature to reassure me. What would this new master be like? Without knocking, Vitalis pushed open the door at the top of the stairs, on the top floor, and we found ourselves in a large attic. There was a great empty space in the middle of the room, and all around the walls were beds, a dozen in all. The walls and ceiling that had once been white were now filthy with smoke, dust, and dirt. On the walls was a drawing of a head in charcoal, and some flowers and birds. "Are you there, Garofoli?" asked Vitalis. "It is so dark I can't see anyone." "It's Vitalis," a weak, drawling voice replied to Vitalis' question. "Signor Garofoli has gone out. He will not be back for 2 hours." A boy about 12 years of age came forward. I was struck by his strange looks. Even now, as I write, I can see him as I saw him then. He had no body, so to speak, for he seemed all legs and head. His great head was out of all proportion. Built so, he could not have been called handsome, yet there was something in his face which attracted one strangely, an expression of sadness and gentleness and, yes, hopelessness. His large eyes held your own with sympathy. "You are sure he will not be back for 2 hours?" asked Vitalis. "Quite sure, Senior. That will be dinner time, and no one ever serves dinner but Signor Garofoli. Well, if he comes in before, tell him that Vitalis will be back in 2 hours. "Very well, Signor." I was about to follow Vitalis when he stopped me. "Stay here," he said. "You can rest." "Oh, I'll come back," he added, reassuringly, noticing my look of anxiety. "Are you Italian?" asked the boy, when Vitalis' heavy step could no longer be heard on the stairs. "No," I replied in French. "I'm French, that's a good thing." "What? You like the French better than the Italians?" "Oh no, I was thinking of you when I said that's a good thing, because if you were Italian you would probably come here to work for Signor Garofoli. And I'd be sorry for you. Is he wicked then?" The boy did not reply, but the look he gave me spoke more than words. As though he did not wish to continue the conversation, he went over to the fireplace. On a shelf in the fireplace was an immense earthenware saucepan. I drew nearer to the fire to warm myself, and I noticed that the pot had something peculiar about it. The lid, through which a straight tube projected to allow the steam to escape, was fixed on the saucepan on one side with a hinge and on the other with a padlock. "Why is that closed with a padlock?" I asked inquisitively. "So that I shan't take any of the soup. I have to look after it, but the boss doesn't trust me." I could not help smiling. You laugh, he said sadly, because you think that I'm a glutton. Perhaps, if you were in my place, you'd do the same as I've done. I'm not a pig, but I'm famished, and the smell of the soup as it comes out through the spout makes me still hungrier. Doesn't Signor Garofoli give you enough to eat? He starves us. Oh, I'll tell you what I have done, went on the boy. 'Cause if he's going to be your master, it will be a lesson for you. My name is Mattia. Garofoli is my uncle. My mother, who lives in Lucca in Italy, is very poor and has only enough for herself and my little sister, Christina. When Garofoli came to beautiful Lucca last year, he brought me back with him. Oh, it was hard to leave my little sister. Signor Garofoli has a lot of boys here. Some of them are chimney sweeps, others rag pickers, and those who are not strong enough to work, sing in the streets or beg. Garofoli gave me 2 little white mice to show to the public, and I had to bring him back 30 sous every night. As many sous as you are short a day, so many blows you get. It is hard to pick up 30 sous, but the blows are hard too, especially when it's Garofoli who gives them. So I did everything that I could to get the money, but I was often short. Nearly all the other boys had their money when they returned at night, but I scarcely ever had mine, and Garofoli was mad. There is another boy here, who also shows mice, and he's taxed 40 sous, and he brings that sum back every night. Several times I went out with him to see how he made it. He paused. Well? I asked. Oh, the ladies always said, give it to the pretty little one, not the ugly boy. The ugly one, of course, was I, so I did not go out with him any more. A blow hurts, but it hurts more to have things like that said, and before a lot of people. You don't know that because no one has ever told you that you are ugly. Well, when Garofoli saw that beating me didn't do any good, he tried another way. Each night, he took away some of my supper. It's hard, but I can't say to the people in the streets, who are watching my mice, give me something or I won't get any supper tonight. They don't give for that reason. Why do they give? Because you are pretty and nice, or because you remind them of a little boy they've lost, not because they think you're hungry. Oh, I know their ways. Say, ain't it cold today? Awful cold. I didn't get fat on begging, went on the boy. I got so pale, and then, after a time, I often heard people say, that poor child is starving to death. A suffering look does what good looks can't do. But you have to be very starved for that. They used to give me food. That was a good time for me, because Garofoli had stopped giving me blows just then to see if it would hurt me more to go without supper. So when I got something to eat outside, I didn't care. But one day Garofoli came along and saw me eating something. A bowl of soup that the fruiter gave me. Then he knew why I didn't mind going without supper at home. After that he made me stay at home and look after the soup here. Every morning before he goes out he puts the meat and the vegetables into the saucepan and locks the lid on, and all I have to do is to see that it boils. I smell the soup, but that's all. The smell of the soup doesn't feed you. It makes you more hungry. Am I very white? As I never go out now, I don't hear people say so, and there's no mirror here. You don't seem any paler than others. I said, "Aw, you say that because you don't want to frighten me, but I'm glad I'm sick. I want to be very ill." I looked at him in amazement. "You don't understand," he said, with a pitiful smile. "When one is very ill, they take care of you or they let you die. If they let me die, it will be all over. I shan't be hungry any more, and there'll be no more beatings. And they do say that when we die, we go up and live with God. Then, if I'm up there, I can look down on Mama and Christina, and I can ask God not to let my little sister be unhappy. Also, if they send me to the hospital, I shall be pleased." The hospital. No matter how sick I felt while tramping across the country, if I thought I might be sent to the hospital, I always found strength to go on. "I'm quite ill now, but not ill enough to be in Garofoli's way," he went on in his weak, drawling voice. but I'm getting weaker. Garofoli, fortunately, hasn't given up beating me entirely. He beat me on the head 8 days ago, and look, it's all swelled out now. You see here this big bump? He told me yesterday it was a tumor, and the way that he spoke, I believe that it's something serious. It hurts awful. I'm so giddy at night when I put my head on the pillow I moan and cry. So I think in 2 or 3 days he'll decide to send me to the hospital. I was in the hospital once, and the sisters speak so kind to you. They say, put out your tongue, little boy, and there's a good boy, every time you do anything they tell you to do. I think I am almost had enough now to be sent there. He came and stood quite close to me, fixing his great eyes on me. Even though I had not the same reason for hiding the truth from him, I did not like to tell him how terrible he looked with his great glittering eyes, his hollow cheeks, and his bloodless lips. I should think you're ill enough to go to the hospital, I said. At last, with dragging limbs, he went slowly over to the table and began to wipe it. Garofoli will be here shortly, he said. We mustn't talk any more. Wearily he went round the table, placing the plates and spoons. I counted 20 plates. So Garofoli had 20 boys. As I only saw 12 beds, they evidently slept, some of them 2 in a bed. What beds? What sheets? The coverlets must have been brought from the stables when they were too old and not warm enough for the horses. Don't you come here, said the boy. Try to get somewhere else. Where? I don't know. No matter where, you'd be better than here. The door opened and a child came into the room. He carried a violin under his arm and a big piece of wood in his hand. Give me that bit of wood, said Mattia, going up to the child. But the little fellow held the piece of wood behind his back. No, he said. Give it me for the fire, the soup will be better. Do you think I brought it for the soup? I've only made 36 sous today, and I thought this bit of wood might save me a beating. It's to make up for the 4 sous I'm short. You'll have to pay. Each in his turn. Mattia said this mechanically, as though the thought of the boy being punished gave him satisfaction. I was surprised to see a hard look come into his soft, sad eyes. I knew later that if you live with wicked people you get to be like them in time. One by one the boys returned, each one as he came and hung his instrument on a nail above his bed. Those who were not musicians, but simply exhibitors of trained animals, put their mice and guinea pigs into a cage. Then a heavy step sounded on the stairs, and a little man, wearing a gray overcoat, came into the room. It was Garofoli. The moment he entered he fixed his eyes on me with a look that scared me. Mattia quickly and politely gave him Vitalis' message. Ah, so Vitalis is here, he said. What does he want? I don't know, replied Mattia. I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to this boy. He is coming back, and he will tell you himself what he wants, I replied. Ah, here's a little fellow who knows the value of words. You're not Italian? No, I'm French. The moment Garofoli entered the room, 2 small boys took their places, one on each side of him, and were waiting until he had finished speaking. Then one took his felt hat and placed it carefully on the bed, and the other brought forward a chair. They did this with the same gravity and respect that a choir boy waits upon a priest. When Garofoli was seated, another little boy brought him a pipe stuffed with tobacco, and a fourth offered him a lighted match. It smells of sulfur, animal, he cried, throwing it in the grate. The culprit hastened to repair his mistake. Lighting another match, he let it burn for a time before offering it to his master. But Garofoli would not accept it. No, you imbecile, he said, pushing the boy aside roughly. Then he turned to another child and said with an ingratiating smile, Riccardo, dearie, bring a match. The dearie hastened to obey. Now, said Garofoli, when he was comfortably installed and his pipe burning. Now to business, my little angels. Bring the book, Mattia. Garofoli made a sign to the boy who had lit the first match. You owe me a sou from yesterday. You promised to bring it today. How much have you brought? The child hesitated for a long time, his face showing distress. I'm 1 sou short, he said at last. Ah, you're 1 sou short. It's not the sou for yesterday, it's a sou for today. That makes 2 sous. I've never seen the like of you. It's not my fault. No excuses. You know the rules. Undo your coat, 2 blows for yesterday. 2 for today, and no supper for your impudence. Ricardo, dearie, you're a good boy and you deserve some recreation. Take the strap. Ricardo, the child who had lit the second match, took down from the wall a short-handled whip with 2 leather-knotted straps. Meanwhile, the boy who was short 2 sous was unfastening his coat. Then he dropped his shirt, baring his body to the waist. Wait a minute, said Garofoli, with an ugly smile. You won't be the only one, perhaps. It's always pleasant to have a companion. The children stood motionless before their master. At his cruel joke, they all forced a laugh. The one who laughed most is the one who is short the most, said Garofoli. I'm sure of that. Who laughed the loudest? All pointed to the boy who had come home first, bringing his piece of wood. How much are you short, you there? Demanded Garofoli. It's not my fault, and the one who says it's not my fault will get an extra cut. How much is missing? I brought back a big piece of wood, a beautiful piece of wood, that's something. But go to the baker's and ask him to exchange your wood for bread. Will he do it? How many sous are you missing? Speak out. I've made 36 sous. You're 4 short, you rogue. And you can stand there before me like that. Down with your shirt. Ricardo, dearie, you're going to have a good time. But the bit of wood? Cried the boy. I'll give it to you for supper. This cruel joke made all the children, who were not to be punished, laugh. All the other boys were then questioned as to how much they had brought home. Ricardo stood with whip in hand until 5 victims were placed in a row before him. You know, Ricardo, said Garofoli, I don't like to look on, because a scene like this always makes me feel ill. But I can hear, and from the noise, I am able to judge the strength of your blows. Go at it heartily, dearie, you are working for your bread. He turned towards the fire, as though it were impossible for him to witness this chastisement. I, in my corner, trembled with indignation and fear. This was the man who was going to be my master. If I did not bring him back the 30 or 40 sous that he demanded of me, I should have to be whipped by Ricardo. Ah, I understood now how Mattia could speak of death so calmly. For each cry you will receive another slash. The first lash of the whip, as it cut into the flesh, made the tears spring to my eyes. I thought that I was forgotten, but I made a mistake. Garofoli was looking at me out of the corner of his eye. There's a boy with a heart, he said, pointing to me. He is not like you other rogues. You laugh when you see your comrade suffer. Take this little comrade for an example. I trembled from head to foot. Their comrade. At the second blow the victim uttered a wail. At the third a piercing shriek. Garofoli lifted his hand. Ricardo stopped with raised whip. I thought Garofoli was going to show mercy, but it was not so. You know how much it hurts me to hear you cry, said Garofoli gently, addressing the victim. You know that if the whip tears your skin, your cries pierce my heart. So then, I warn you that for each cry you will receive another slash, and it will be your own fault. If you have any affection or gratitude, you will keep silent. Go on, Ricardo. Ricardo raised his arm, and the strap curled on the backs of the victims. Oh, mama, mama, cried one. Thank God, I saw no more of this frightful torture, for at this moment the door was thrown open and VITALIS entered. In a glance, he understood all. He had heard the shrieks while climbing the stairs. Running to Ricardo, he snatched the whip from him, then, wheeling round upon Garofoli, he stood before him with folded arms. It all happened so quickly that, for a moment, I was dumbfounded, but Garofoli quickly recovered himself and said gently, Isn't it terrible? That child has no heart. Shame! It's a shame!" cried Vitalis. "That is just what I say," murmured Garofoli. "Stop that," commanded Vitalis. "It's you, not the child. What a cowardly shame to torture these poor children who cannot defend themselves. Don't you meddle in what does not concern you, you old fool," cried Garofoli, changing his tone. "It concerns the police," retorted Vitalis. "You threaten me with the police, do you?" cried Garofoli. "Yes, I do," replied my master, nowise intimidated by the bully's fury. "Ah, Vitalis," he hissed. "So you'll talk? Well, I can talk also. Your affairs do not concern me, but there are others who are interested in you, and if I say one name, who will have to hide his head in shame." My master was silent. Shame. His shame. I was amazed, but before I had time to think, he had taken me by the hand. "Come, Rémi," he said, and he drew me to the door. "Oh," cried Garofoli, now laughing. "I thought you wanted to talk to me, old fellow. I have nothing to say to you." Then, without another word, we went down the stairs, he still holding me tightly by the hand. With what relief I followed him! I had escaped from that tyrant. If I had dared, I would have thrown my arms around Vitalis' neck. Chapter 17. Poor Vitalis. While we were in the street, Vitalis said not a word, but soon we came to a narrow alley, and he sat down on a milestone and passed his hand several times across his forehead. "It may be fine to listen to the voice of generosity," he said, as though speaking to himself, "but now we're in the gutters of Paris, without a sou, not a bite to eat." "Are you hungry?" he asked, looking up at me. "I haven't eaten anything since that little roll you gave me this morning. Poor child, and you'll have to go to bed tonight without supper. And where are we going to sleep? Did you count on sleeping at Garofoli's then? I counted upon you sleeping there. And as he would have given me 20 francs for you for the winter, I could have managed for the time being. But, seeing the way he treated those children, I could not give you to him. Oh, you are so good! Perhaps in this old, hardened vagabond there is still a bit of the young man's heart left." This old vagabond calculated shrewdly, but the young man still in him upset all. "Now where to go?" he murmured. It was already late and the cold had increased. It was going to be a hard night. For a long time Vitalis sat on the stone. Cappy and I stood silently before, waiting until he had come to some decision. Finally he rose. "Where are we going?" "To Italy, to try and find a racecourse where I've slept sometimes." "Are you tired?" "I rested at Garofoli's. The pity is that I haven't rested, and I can't do much more. But we must get along. Forward. March." "Children." This was his good-humor signal for the dogs and myself when we were about to start, but this night he said it sadly. Here we were, wandering in the streets of Paris. The night was dark, and the gas jets, which flickered in the wind, lit the alleys but dimly. At each step we slipped on the ice-covered pavement. Vitalis held me by the hand, and Cappy followed at our heels. From time to time, the poor dog stopped behind to look amongst a heap of garbage to see if he could find a bone or a crust, for he was oh so hungry, but the garbage was covered with frozen snow, and he searched in vain. With drooping ears, he trotted on to catch up with us. After the big streets, more alleys. After the alleys, more big streets. We walked on, and on. The few pedestrians that we met stared at us in astonishment. Was it our costumes? Was it the tired way we plodded along which arrested their attention? The policeman that we passed turned round and followed us with a glance. Without saying a word, Vitalis tramped on, his back almost bent double, but despite the cold, his hand burned in mine. It seemed to me that he was trembling. Sometimes, when he stopped to lean for a minute against my shoulder, I felt all his body shaken with trembling. Ordinarily, I would not dare to have questioned him, but I felt I must tonight. Besides, I had a great wish to tell him how much I loved him, or, at least, that I wanted to do something for him. "You are ill?" I said, when he stopped again. "I'm afraid so. Anyway, I'm very tired. This cold is too severe for my old blood. I need a good bed and a supper before a fire. But that's a dream. Forward! March! Children! Forward! March!" We had left the city behind us. We were now in the suburbs. We saw no people or policemen or street lights, only a lighted window here and there, and over our heads the dark blue sky dotted with a few stars. The wind, which blew more bitter and more violently, stuck our clothing to our bodies. Fortunately, it was at our backs, but as the sleeves of my coat were all torn near the shoulders, it blew in and slipped along my arms, chilling me to the bone. Although it was dark and the streets continually crossed each other, Vitalis walked like a man who knows his way and was perfectly sure of his road. So I followed, feeling sure that we should not lose ourselves. Suddenly he stopped. "Do you see a group of trees?" he asked. "I don't see anything. You don't see a big black mass?" I looked on all sides before answering. I saw no trees or houses. Space all around us. There was no other sound save the whistle of the wind. "See, down there." He stretched out his right hand before him. Then, as I did not reply, for I was afraid to say that I saw nothing, he trudged on again. Some minutes passed in silence, then he stopped once more and asked me if I did not see a group of trees. A vague fear made my voice tremble when I replied that I saw nothing. "It is fear, my boy, that makes your eyes dance. Look again. I tell you, I do not see any trees, not on the big road. I can't see anything. We've made a mistake." I could say nothing, for I did not know where we were, nor where we were going. "Let us walk for another 5 minutes, and, if we do not see the trees, we will come back here. I might have made a mistake on the road." Now that I knew that we had gone astray, I seemed to have no more strength left. Vitalis pulled me by the arm. Come, come, I can't walk any farther. And do you think I'm going to carry you?" I followed him. "Are there any deep ruts in the road?" "No." "Then we must turn back." We turned. Now we faced the wind. It stung our faces like a lash. It seemed that my face was being scorched with a flame. "We have to take a road leading from the crossroads," said my master feebly. "Tell me when you see it." For a quarter of an hour we went on, struggling against the wind. In the doleful silence of the night the noise of our footsteps echoed on the dry, hard earth, although scarcely able to put one foot before the other. It was I who dragged Vitalis. How anxiously I looked to the left. In the dark shadows, I suddenly saw a little red light. "See, there's a light," I said, pointing. "Where?" Vitalis looked. Although the light was but a short distance off, he saw nothing. I knew then that his sight was going. "What is that light to us?" he asked. "It is a lamp burning on the table of some worker, or it's near the bed of a dying person. We cannot go and knock at those doors. Away in the country, during the night, you can ask hospitality, but so near Paris, we must not expect hospitality here. Come!" A few steps more, and I thought I could make out the crossroads and a black mass which must be the trees. I let go of my master's hand to go ahead quicker. There were deep ruts in the road. "See, here are the ruts," I cried. "Give me your hand, we are saved," said Vitalis. "Look, now you can see the group of trees." I told him that I thought I could see the trees. "In 5 minutes we shall be there," he murmured. We trudged along, but the 5 minutes seemed an eternity. "Where are the ruts?" "They are still on the right. We must have passed the entrance to the racecourse without seeing it. I think we'd better go back." Once more we turned back. "Do you see the trees?" "Yes, they're on the left. And the ruts?" "There are not any." "Am I blind?" asked Vitalis in a low voice, as he passed his hands across his eyes. "Walk straight along by the trees, and give me your hand. Here is a wall. No, it's a heap of stones. No, I am sure it's a wall. Vitalis took a step aside to see if it really was as I said. He stretched out his 2 hands and touched the wall. Yes, it's a wall, he murmured. Where is the entrance? Look for the track. I stooped down to the ground and felt all along to the end of the wall, but I found no entrance. Then, turning back to where Vitalis stood, I continued to feel along the wall on the other side. The result was the same. There was no opening, no gate. There is nothing, I said. The situation was terrible. Without doubt, my master was delirious. Perhaps there was no racecourse here at all. Vitalis stood for a moment as though in a dream. Cappy began to bark impatiently. Shall we look further? I asked. No, the racecourse is walled up. Walled up? Yes. They have closed the opening, and it is impossible for us to get inside. Well then, what to do, eh? I don't know. Die here. Oh, master. Master, yes, you don't want to die. You are so young. Life seems good to you. Let us walk on. Can you still walk a bit further, my child? Oh, but you, when I can go no farther, I shall fall down like an old horse. Where shall we go? Return to Paris. When we meet a policeman, we will let him take us to the police station. I did not want that, but I cannot let you die of cold, boy. Come, little Rémi, come. On, my children. Courage. We turned back the same way that we had come. What time was it? I had no idea. We had walked for hours, a long, long time, and so slowly. Perhaps it was midnight or 1 o'clock. The sky was still a somber blue, without moon, and with but few stars, and the few that had appeared seemed to me to be smaller than usual. The wind had increased. The snow beat in our faces. The houses that we passed were closed for the night. It seemed to me that if the people who slept there, warmly beneath the sheets, knew how cold we were outside, they would have opened their doors to us. Vitalis walked slower and slower. When I spoke to him, he made a sign to me to be silent. We were now nearing the city. Vitalis stopped. I knew that he had come to the end of his strength. Shall I knock at one of the doors? I asked. No, they will not let us in. They are gardeners who live here. They supply the market. They would not get up at this hour to take us in. Let us go on. But he had more will than strength. After a moment, he stopped again. I must rest a little, he said feebly. I can't go on. There was a gate leading to a big garden. The wind had blown a lot of straw that covered a manure heap near the gate into the street. I am going to sit here, said Vitalis. You said that if we sat down, we should get too cold to get up again. He made no reply, but signed for me to heap up the straw against the door. Then he fell, rather than sat down upon it. His teeth chattered and all his body shook. Bring some more straw, he said. With a lot of straw we can keep the wind from us. The wind, yes, but not the cold. When I had gathered up all the straw that I could, I sat down beside Vitalis. Come quite close to me, he said, and lift Cappy on your lap. He will give you some warmth from his body. Vitalis was ill. Did he know how ill? As I crept close up against him, he bent over and kissed me. That was the second time he had kissed me. Alas, it was the last. Scarcely had I cuddled up against Vitalis than I felt my eyes close. I tried to keep them open, but I could not. I pinched my arms, but there was no feeling in my flesh. On my legs, which were drawn up to my chest, Cappy slept already. The wind blew the wisps of straw upon us like dried leaves that fall from a tree. There was not a soul in the street, and around us was the silence of death. This silence frightened me. Of what was I afraid? I did not know, but a vague fear came over me. It seemed to me that I was dying there. And then I felt very sad. I thought of Chavanon, of poor Mother Barberin. Must I die without seeing her again, and our little house, and my little garden? Then, I was no longer cold. It seemed that I was back in my little garden. The sun was shining and was so warm. The jonquils were opening their golden petals. The birds were singing in the trees and on the hedges. Yes, and Mother Barberin was hanging out the clothes that she had just washed in the brook, which rippled over the pebbles. Then I left Chavanon and joined Arthur and Mrs. Milligan on the Swan. Then my eyes closed again, my heart seemed to grow heavy, and I remembered no more. Chapter 18, New Friends. When I awoke I was in a bed, and the flames from a big fire lit up the room in which I was lying. I had never seen this room before, nor the people who stood near the bed. There was a man in a gray smock and clogs, and 3 or 4 children. One, which I noticed particularly, was a little girl about 6 years old, with great big eyes that were so expressive they seemed as though they could speak. I raised myself on my elbow. They all came closer. "Vitalis?" I asked. "He is asking for his father," said a girl, who seemed to be the eldest of the children. "He is not my father, he is my master," I said. "Where is he? Where's Cappy?" If Vitalis had been my father they perhaps would have broken the news to me gently. But as he was only my master, they thought that they could tell me the truth at once. They told me that my poor master was dead. The gardener, who lived on the grounds outside of which we had fallen exhausted, had found us early the next morning, when he and his son were starting off with their vegetables and flowers to the markets. They found us lying, huddled together in the snow, with a little covering of their straw over us. Vitalis was already dead, and I should have died, but Cappy had crept up to my chest and kept my heart warm. They had carried us into the house, and I had been placed in one of the children's warm beds. "And Cappy?" I asked, when the gardener stopped talking. "Cappy? Yes, the dog. I don't know, he's disappeared. He followed the body," said one of the children. "Didn't you see him, Benjamin?" "Should say I did," answered another boy. "He walked behind the men who carried the stretcher. He kept his head down, and now and again he jumped up on the body, and when they made him get down he moaned and howled something terrible. Poor Cappy! How many times, as an actor, had he not followed Zerbino's funeral? Even the most serious children had been obliged to laugh at his display of grief. The more he moaned, the more they had laughed. The gardener and his children left me alone, not knowing quite what to do or what I was going to do. I got up and dressed. My harp had been placed at the foot of the bed upon which I was lying. I passed the strap over my shoulder and went into the room where the family were. I should have to go, but where? While in bed, I had not felt very weak, but now I could scarcely stand. I was obliged to hold on to a chair to keep from falling. The odor of the soup was too much for me. I was reminded brutally that I had eaten nothing the night before. I felt faint, and staggering, I dropped into a chair by the fire. "Don't you feel well, my boy?" asked the gardener. I told him that I did not feel very well, and I asked him to let me sit by the fire for a little while, but it was not the heat that I wanted. It was food. I felt weaker as I watched the family take their soup. If I had dared, I would have asked for a bowl, but Vitalis had taught me not to beg. I could not tell them I was hungry. Why? I don't know quite, unless it was that I could not ask for anything that I was unable to return. The little girl with the strange look in her eyes, and whose name was Lise, sat opposite to me. Suddenly, she got up from the table, and, taking her bowl which was full of soup, she brought it over to me and placed it on my knees. Weakly, for I could no longer speak, I nodded my head to thank her. The father did not give me time to speak even if I had been able. "Take it, my boy," he said. "What Lise gives is given with a kind heart. There is more if you want more." "If I want more." The bowl of soup was swallowed in a few seconds. When I put down the soup, Lise, who had remained standing before me, heaved a little sigh of content. Then she took my bowl and held it out to her father to have it refilled, and when it was full she brought it to me with such a sweet smile that in spite of my hunger, I sat staring at her, without thinking to take it from her. The second bowlful disappeared promptly like the first. It was no longer a smile that curved Lisa's pretty lips. She burst out laughing. "Well, my boy," said her father, "you've got an appetite, and no mistake." I was much ashamed, but after a moment, I thought it better to confess the truth than to be thought a glutton. So I told them that I had not had any supper the night before. "And dinner? No dinner either. And your master? He hadn't eaten either. Then he died as much from starvation as from cold." The hot soup had given me strength. I got up to go. "Where are you going?" asked the father. "I don't know. Got any friends or relations in Paris?" "No." "Where do you live?" "We hadn't any home. We only got to the city yesterday." "What are you going to do, then?" "Play my harp and get a little money in Paris." "You had better return to your parents in the country." "Where do they live?" "I haven't any parents. My master bought me from my foster parents." "You have been good to me, and I thank you with all my heart and—" "If you like, I'll come back here on Sunday and play my harp while you dance." While speaking, I had walked towards the door, but I had only taken a few steps when Lise, who followed me, took my hand and pointed to my harp. "Do you want me to play now?" I asked, smiling at her. She nodded and clapped her hands. Although I had no heart to play, I played my prettiest waltz for this little girl. At first she listened with her big, beautiful eyes fixed on me. Then she began to keep time with her feet, and very soon was dancing gaily round the kitchen, while her brothers and sisters watched her. Her father was delighted. When the waltz was finished, the child came and made me a pretty curtsy. I would have played for her all day, but the father thought she had danced enough, so, instead, I sang the Neapolitan song that Vitalis had taught me. Lise stood opposite me, moving her lips as though repeating the words. Then, suddenly, she turned round and threw herself into her father's arms, crying. "That's enough music," said the father. "Isn't she a silly?" said the brother named Benjamin, scoffingly. "First she dances, and then she cries. She's not so silly as you," retorted the elder sister, leaning over the little one affectionately. "She understands." While Lise cried on her father's knee, I again strapped my harp to my shoulder and made for the door. "Where are you going?" asked the gardener. "Wouldn't you like to stay here and work? It won't be an easy life. You'll have to get up very early in the morning and work hard all day. But you may be sure that you won't have to go through what you did last night. You will have a bed and food, and you will have the satisfaction of knowing that you have earned it. And if you're a good boy, which I think you are, you will be one of the family." Lise turned round and, through her tears, she looked at me and smiled. I could hardly believe what I heard. I just stared at the gardener. Then Lise jumped off her father's knee and came up and took my hand. "Well, what do you say, boy?" asked the father. "A family. I should have a family. I should not be alone." The man I had lived with for several years, who had been almost a father to me, was dead, and dear, good Cappy, my companion and friend, whom I loved so much, was lost. I had thought that all was over for me, and here was this good man offering to take me into his family. Life would begin again for me. He said he offered me food and lodging, but what meant more to me was this home life, which would be mine also. These boys would be my brothers. This pretty little Lise would be my sister. I would no longer be nobody's boy. In my childish dreams I had more than once thought I might find my father and mother, but I had never thought that I should have brothers and sisters. And this was what was being offered to me. I quickly slipped the strap of my harp from off my shoulders. "There's his reply," said the father, laughing. "I can see by your face how pleased you are. No need for you to say anything. Hang your harp up there on the wall, and when you get tired of us you may take it down and go on your way again, but you must do like the swallows, choose your season to start on your flight. Don't go off in the depth of winter." My new family consisted of the father, whose name was Pierre Quinn, 2 boys, Alexis and Benjamin, and 2 girls, Edionette, the elder, and Lise, the youngest of the family. Lise was dumb. She was not born dumb, but just before her 4th birthday, through an illness, she had lost the power of speech. This affliction, fortunately, had not impaired her intelligence. Quite the contrary, her intelligence was developed to an extraordinary degree. She seemed to understand everything, and her sweet, pretty ways made her adored by the family. Since the mother had died, Edionette had been mother to the family. She had left school early to stay at home to cook and sew and clean the house for her father and brothers. They had quite forgotten that she was the daughter, the sister. They were so accustomed to seeing her doing the work of a servant, for she seldom went out and was never angry. Carrying Lise in her arms, dragging Benny by the hand, getting up at daybreak to get her father's breakfast, going to bed late after washing the dishes, she had not had time to be a child. At 14 years, her face was serious and sad. It was not the face of a little girl. 5 minutes after I had hung my harp on the wall, I was telling them all what had happened the night before, how we had hoped to sleep on the racecourse, when I heard a scratching on the door, which opened onto the garden. Then there was a plaintive whine. "Cappy! Cappy!" I cried, jumping up quickly. But Lise was before me. She had already opened the door. Cappy sprang upon me. I took him in my arms. With little howls of joy, and his whole body trembling, he licked my face. "And Cappy?" I asked. My question was understood. "Well, Cappy will remain with you, of course," said the father. As though he knew what we were saying, the dog jumped to the ground, and putting his paw straight on his heart, he bowed. It made the children laugh, especially Lise, and to amuse them, I wanted Cappy to perform some of his tricks. But he had no wish to obey me. He jumped on my knee and commenced to lick my face. Then he sprung down and began to drag me by the sleeve of my coat. "He wants me to go out, to take you to your master." The police, who had taken VITALIS away, had said that they wished to question me when I was better. It was very uncertain as to when they would come, and I was anxious to have news. Perhaps VITALIS was not dead as they had thought. Perhaps there was still a spark of life left in my master's body. Upon seeing my anxiety, Monsieur Quinn offered to take me to the police station. When we arrived there, I was questioned at length, but I would give no information until they had declared that poor VITALIS was really dead. Then I told them what I knew. It was very little. Of myself, I was able to say that I had no parents and that VITALIS had hired me for a sum of money, which he had paid in advance to my foster mother's husband. "And now?" inquired the commissioner. "We are going to take care of him," interrupted my new friend. "That is, if you will let us." The commissioner was willing to confide me to his care and complimented him upon his kind act. It is not easy for a child to hide much from a police officer who knows his business. They very soon trap persons into telling what they wish to hide. This was so in my case. The commissioner had quickly gleaned from me all about Garofoli. "There is nothing to do but to take him to this chap, Garofoli," he said to one of his men. "Once in the street he mentions, he will soon recognize the house. You can go up with him and question the man." The 3 of us started. As the officer had said, we found the street and the house. We went up to the 4th floor. I did not see Mattia. He had probably been taken off to the hospital. Upon seeing the officer and recognizing me, Garofoli paled and looked frightened, but he soon recovered himself when he learned that they had only come to question him about VITALIS. "So the old fellow is dead?" he said. "You know him? Well, tell us all you can about him. There is not much to tell." His name was not VITALIS. He was Carlo Balzani, and if you had lived 35 or 40 years ago in Italy, that name alone would tell you all you want to know. Carlo Balzani was the greatest singer of the day. He sang in Naples, Rome, Milan, Venice, Florence, London, and Paris. Then came the time when he lost his magnificent voice, and as he could not be the greatest of singers, he would not dim his fame by singing on cheaper stages unworthy of his great reputation. Instead, he preferred to hide himself from the world, and from all who had known him in his triumph. Yet he had to live. He tried several professions, but could not succeed. Then finally he took to training dogs. But in his poverty, he was still very proud, and he would have died of shame if the public could have known that the brilliant Carlo Balzani had sunk to the depths he had. It was just a matter of chance that I learned his secret. Poor Carlo Balzani, dear Vitalis. Chapter 19, Disaster. Vitalis had to be buried the next day, and a Quinn promised to take me to the funeral. But the next day I could not rise from my bed, for in the night I was taken very ill. My chest seemed to burn like poor little Pretty Heart's after he had spent the night in the tree. The doctor was called in. I had pneumonia. The doctor wanted me sent to the hospital, but the family would not hear of it. It was during this illness that I learned to appreciate Etiennette's goodness. She devoted herself to nursing me. How good and kind she was during that terrible sickness. When she was obliged to leave me to attend to her household duties, Lise took her place, and many times in my delirium I saw little Lise sitting at the foot of my bed with her big eyes fixed on me anxiously. In my delirium I thought that she was my guardian angel, and I would speak to her and tell her of all my hopes and desires. It was from this time that I began to consider her as something ideal, as a different being from the other people I met. It seemed surprising that she could live in our life. In my boyish imagination, I could picture her flying away with big white wings to a more beautiful world. I was ill for a very long time. At night, when I was almost suffocating, I had to have someone to sit up with me. Then Alexis and Benny would take turns. At last I was convalescent, and then it was Lise who replaced Etiennette and walked with me down by the river. Of course, during these walks she could not talk. But strange to say, we had no need of words. We seemed to understand each other so well without talking. Then came the day when I was strong enough to work with the others in the garden. I had been impatient to commence, for I wanted to do something for my kind friends, who had done so much for me. As I was still weak, the task that was given to me was in proportion to my strength. Every morning after the frost had passed, I had to lift the glass frames, and at night, before it got chilly, I had to close them again. During the day I had to shade the wall flowers with straw coverings to protect them from the sun. This was not difficult to do, but it took all my time, for I had several hundred glasses to move twice daily. Days and months passed. I was very happy. Sometimes I thought that I was too happy, it could not last. A Quinn was considered one of the cleverest florists round about Paris. After the wallflower season was over, other flowers replaced them. For many weeks we had been working very hard, as the season promised to be an especially good one. We had not even taken a rest on Sunday, but as all the flowers were now perfect and ready for the approaching season, it was decided that, for a reward, we were all to go and have dinner on Sunday, August 5th, with one of a Quinn's friends, who was also a florist. Cappy was to be one of the party. We were to work until 4 o'clock, and when all was finished we were to lock the gates and go to our cule. Supper was for 6 o'clock. After supper we were to come home at once, so as not to be late in getting to bed, as Monday morning we had to be up bright and early, ready for work. A few minutes before 4 we were all ready. "Come on, all of you!" cried a Quinn gaily. "I'm going to lock the gates. Come, Cappy!" Taking Lise by the hand, I began to run with her. Cappy jumped around us, barking. We were all dressed up in our best, and looking forward to a good dinner. Some people turned round to watch us as we passed. I don't know what I looked like, but Lise in her blue dress and white shoes was the prettiest little girl that one could see. Time passed quickly. We were having dinner out of doors when, just as we had finished, one of us remarked how dark it was getting. Clouds were gathering quickly in the sky. "Children, we must go home," said Quinn. "There's going to be a storm. Go already," came the chorus. "If the wind rises, all the glasses will be upset." We all knew the value of those glass frames and what they mean to a florist. It would be terrible for us if the wind broke ours. "I'll hurry ahead with Benny and Alexis," the father said. "Rémi can come on with Edionette and Lise." They rushed off. Edionette and I followed more slowly with Lise. No one laughed now. The sky grew darker. The storm was coming quickly. Clouds of dust swirled around us. We had to turn our backs and cover our eyes with our hands, for the dust blinded us. There was a streak of lightning across the sky, then came a heavy clap of thunder. Edionette and I had taken Lise by the hands. We were trying to drag her along faster, but she could scarcely keep up with us. Would the father, Benny, and Alexis get home before the storm broke? If they were only in time to close the glass cases so that the wind could not get under them and upset them. The thunder increased. The clouds were so heavy that it seemed almost night. Then suddenly there was a downpour of hail. The stones struck us in the face, and we had to race to take shelter under a big gateway. In a minute the road was covered with white, like in winter. The hailstones were as large as pigeon eggs. As they fell, they made a deafening sound, and every now and again we could hear the crash of broken glass. With the hailstones, as they slid from the roofs to the street, fell all sorts of things, pieces of slate, chimney pots, tiles, etc. "Oh, the glass frames!" cried Edionette. I had the same thought. "Even if they get there before the hail, they will never have time to cover the glasses with straw. Everything will be ruined. They say that hail only falls in places," I said, trying to hope still. "Oh, this is too near home for us to escape. If it falls on the garden the same as here, poor father will be ruined. And he counted so much on those flowers. He needs the money so badly." I had heard that the glass frames cost as much as 1,800 francs a hundred, and I knew what a disaster it would be if the hail broke our 500 or 600, without counting the plants and the conservatories. I would like to have questioned Edionette, but we could scarcely hear each other speak, and she did not seem disposed to talk. She looked at the hail falling with a hopeless expression, like a person would look upon his house burning. The hurricane lasted but a short while. It stopped as suddenly as it had commenced. It lasted perhaps 6 minutes. The cloud swept over Paris, and we were able to leave our shelter. The hailstones were thick on the ground. Lise could not walk in them in her thin shoes, so I took her on my back and carried her. Her pretty face, which was so bright when going to the party, was now grief-stricken, and the tears rolled down her cheeks. Before long we reached the house. The big gates were open, and we went quickly into the garden. What a sight met our eyes! All the glass frames were smashed to atoms. Flowers, pieces of glass, and hailstones were all heaped together in our once beautiful garden. Everything was shattered. Where was the father? We searched for him. Last of all, we found him in the big conservatory, of which every pane of glass was broken. He was seated on a wheelbarrow in the midst of the debris which covered the ground. Alexis and Benjamin stood beside him silently. "My children, my poor little ones," he cried when we all were there. He took Lise in his arms and began to sob. He said nothing more. What could he have said? It was a terrible catastrophe, but the consequences were still more terrible. I soon learned this from Edionette. 10 years ago, their father had bought the garden and had built the house himself. The man who had sold him the ground had also lent him the money to buy the necessary materials required by a florist. The amount was payable in yearly payments for 15 years. The man was only waiting for an occasion when the florist would be late in payment to take back the ground, house, material, keeping, of course, the 10-year payments that he had already received. This was a speculation on the man's part, for he had hoped that before the 15 years expired there would come a day when the florist would be unable to meet his notes. This day had come at last. Now what was going to happen, we were not left long in doubt. The day after the notes fell due, this sum which was to have been paid from the sale of his season's flowers, a gentleman dressed all in black came to the house and handed us a stamped paper. It was the process server. He came often, so many times that he soon began to know us by name. "How do you do, Emily Annette? Hello, Rémi. Hello, Alexis." And he handed us his stamped paper smilingly, as though we were friends. The father did not stay in the house. He was always out. He never told us where he went. Probably he went to call on businessmen, or he might have been at court. What would the result be? A part of the winter passed. As we were unable to repair the conservatories and renew the glass frames, we cultivated vegetables and hardier flowers that did not demand shelter. They were not very productive, but at least it was something, and it was work for us. One evening the father returned home more depressed than usual. "Children," he said, "it is all over." I was about to leave the room, for I felt that he had something serious to say to his children. He signed to me to stop. "You are one of the family, Rémi," he said sadly, "and although you are not very old, you know what trouble is. Children, I am going to leave you." There was a cry on all sides. Lise flung her arms round her father's neck. He held her very tight. "Ah, it's hard to leave you, dear children," he said, "but the courts have ordered me to pay, and as I have no money, everything here has to be sold, and as that is not enough, I have to go to prison for 5 years. As I am not able to pay with my money, I have to pay with my liberty." We all began to cry. "Yes, it's sad," he continued brokenly, "but a man can't do anything against the law. My attorney says that it used to be worse than it is." There was a tearful silence. "This is what I have decided is the best thing to do," continued the father. "Rémi, who is the best scholar, will write to my sister Catherine and explain the matter to her and ask her to come to us. Aunt Catherine has plenty of common sense, and she will be able to decide what should be done for the best." It was the first time that I had written a letter, and this was a very painful one, but we still had a ray of hope. We were very ignorant children, and the fact that Aunt Catherine was coming, and that she was practical, made us hope that everything could be made right. But she did not come as soon as we had hoped. A few days later the father had just left the house to call on one of his friends, when he met the police face to face coming for him. He returned to the house with them. He was very pale. He had come to say goodbye to his children. "Don't be so downcast, man," said one of them who had come to take him. "To be in prison for debt is not so dreadful as you seem to think. You'll find some very good fellows there." I went to fetch the 2 boys, who were in the garden. Little Lise was sobbing. One of the men stooped down and whispered something in her ear, but I did not hear what he said. The parting was over very quickly. A Quinn caught Lise up in his arms and kissed her again and again. Then he put her down, but she clung to his hand. Then he kissed Annette, Alexis and Benny, and gave Lise into her sister's care. I stood a little apart, but he came to me and kissed me affectionately, just like the others, and then they took him away. We all stood in the middle of the kitchen crying. Not one of us had a word to say. Aunt Catherine arrived an hour later. We were still crying bitterly. For a country woman who had no education or money, the responsibility that had fallen upon her was heavy. A family of destitute children, the eldest not yet 16, the youngest a dumb girl. Aunt Catherine had been a nurse in a lawyer's family. She had once called upon this man to ask his advice, and it was he who decided our fate. When she returned from the lawyer's, she told us what had been arranged. Lise was to go and live with her. Alexis was to go to an uncle at Varza's, Benny to another uncle, who was a florist at St. Quentin, and Annette to an aunt who lived at the seashore. I listened to these plans, waiting until they came to me. When Aunt Catherine ceased speaking and I had not been mentioned, I said, "And me? Why, you don't belong to the family. I'll work for you. You're not one of the family. Ask Alexis and Benny if I can't work, and I like work." "And Soup also, but he's one of the family." "Yes, Aunt, he's one of the family," came from all sides. Lise came forwards and clasped her hands before her aunt with an expression that said more than words. "Poor mite," said Aunt Catherine. "I know you'd like him to come and live with us, but we can't always get what we want. You're my niece, and if my man makes a face when I take you home, all I have to tell him is that you're a relation, and I'm going to have you with me. It will be like that with your other uncles and aunts. They will take a relation, but not strangers." I felt there was nothing to say. What she said was only too true. I was not one of the family. I could claim nothing. Ask nothing, that would be begging. And yet I loved them all, and they all loved me. Aunt Catherine sent us to bed, after telling us that we were to be parted the next day. Scarcely had we got upstairs than they all crowded round me. Lise clung to me, crying. Then I knew that in spite of their grief at parting from one another, it was of me that they thought. They pitied me because I was alone. I felt, indeed, then that I was their brother. Suddenly an idea came to me. "Listen," I said. "Even if your aunts and uncles don't want me, I can see that you consider me one of the family. Yes, yes." They all cried. Lise, who could not speak, just squeezed my hand and looked up at me with her big, beautiful eyes. "Well, I'm a brother, and I'll prove it," I said stoutly. "There's a job with Pernod. Shall I go over and speak to him tomorrow?" asked Edionette. "I don't want a job. If I take a job, I shall have to stay in Paris, and I shan't see you again. I'm going to put on my sheepskin and take my harp, and go first to one place, and then to another where you are all going to live. I shall see you all one after the other, and I'll carry the news from one to the other, so you'll all be in touch. I haven't forgotten my songs nor my dance music, and I'll get enough money to live." Every face beamed. I was glad they were so pleased with my idea. For a long time we talked, then Edionette made each one go to bed. But no one slept much that night, I least of all. The next day at daybreak Lise took me into the garden. "You want to speak to me?" I asked. She nodded her head. "You are unhappy because we are going to be parted? You need not tell me. I can see it in your eyes, and I am unhappy too." She made a sign that it was something else she wanted to say. "In 15 days, I shall be at Droitsy, where you are going to live." She shook her head. "You don't want me to go to Droitsy?" In order for us to understand each other, I made more progress by questioning. She replied either with a nod or a shake of the head. She told me that she wanted to see me at Droitsy, but pointing her finger in 3 directions. She made me understand that I must first go and see her brothers and sister. "You want me first to go to Varzas, then Esnans, and then St. Quentin?" She smiled and nodded, pleased that I understood. "Why?" Then with her lips and hands, and above all with her eyes, she explained to me why she wished this. She wanted me to go and see her sister and brothers first, so that when I reached Droitsy I could tell her news of them. They had to start at 8 o'clock, and Aunt Catherine had ordered a cab to take them, first of all to the prison to say goodbye to their father, and then each, with their baggage, to the different depots where they had to take their trains. At 7 o'clock Edionette, in her turn, took me in the garden. "I want to give you a little keepsake, Rémi," she said. "Take this little case. My godfather gave it to me. You'll find thread, needles, and scissors in it. When you are tramping along the roads you'll need them, for I shan't be there to put a patch on your clothes, nor sew a button on. When you use my scissors, think of us all." While Edionette was speaking to me, Alexis loitered near. When she left me to return to the house, he came up. "Say, Rémi," he began, "I've got 2 5-franc pieces. Take one. I'll be so pleased if you will." Of the 5 of us, Alexis was the only one who cared very much for money. We always made fun of his greed. He saved up so by so, counting his hoard continually. He was always very proud when he had a brand new piece. His offer touched me to the heart. I wanted to refuse, but he insisted, and slipped a shiny silver piece into my hand. I knew that his friendship for me must be very strong if he were willing to share his treasure with me. Benjamin, neither, had forgotten me. He also wanted to give me a present. He gave me his knife, and in exchange he exacted a sou, because he said, "A knife cuts friendship." The time passed quickly. The moment had come for us to part. As the cab was drawing up at the house, Lise again made a sign for me to follow her into the garden. "Please," called her aunt. She made no reply, but ran quickly down the path. She stopped at a big Bengal rose tree and cut off a branch. Then, turning to me, she divided the stalk in two. There was a rose on either side. The language of the lips is a small thing compared with the language of the eyes. How cold and empty are words compared with looks. "Please, Lise," cried her aunt. The baggage was already in the cab. I took down my harp and called to Cappy. At the sight of my old suit, he jumped and barked with joy. He loved his liberty on the high roads more than being closed up in the garden. They all got into the cab. I lifted Lise onto her aunt's lap. I stood there half dazed. Then the aunt gently pushed me away and closed the door. They were off. Through a mist I watched Lise as she leaned out of the window waving her hand to me. Then the cab sharply turned the corner of the street, and all I could see was a cloud of dust. Leaning on my harp, with Cappy sprawling at my feet, I stayed there looking absently down the street. A neighbor, who had been asked to lock up the house and keep the key, called to me. "Are you going to stay there all day?" "No, I'm off now." "Where are you going?" "Straight ahead, if you'd like to stay," he said, perhaps out of pity. "I'll keep you, but I can't pay you, because you're not very strong. Later I might give you something." I thanked him, but said no. "Well, as you like." "I was only thinking for your own good. Goodbye and good luck." He went away. The cab had gone. The house was locked up. I turned away from the home where I had lived for 2 years, and where I had hoped always to live. The sky was clear, the weather warm, very different from the icy night when poor VITALIS and I had fallen exhausted by the wall. So these 2 years had only been a halt. I must go on my way again. But the stay had done me good. It had given me strength, and I had made dear friends. I was not now alone in the world, and I had an object in life, to be useful and give pleasure to those I loved. Chapter 20. Mattia. The world was before me. I could go where I liked, north, south, east, or west. I was my own master. How many children there are who say to themselves, "If I could only do as I liked, if I were my own master," and how impatiently they look forward to this day, when they can do the things they have longed to do, often very foolish things. Between these children and myself there was a vast difference. When they do anything foolish there is a hand stretched out, and they are picked up if they fall. If I fell I should go down, 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 and I might not be able to pick myself up again. I was afraid. I knew the dangers that beset me. Before beginning my wanderings, I wanted to see the man who had been so good to me. Aunt Catherine had not wished to take me with them when they had gone to say goodbye, but I felt that, at least, I could go and see him now that I was alone. I did not dare walk across Paris with Cappy running at my heels. I was afraid that a policeman would stop and question me. My greatest fear was the police. I tied a string to Cappy's collar. I was loath to do this, for I knew that it hurt his self-respect, but it had to be, and in this humiliating manner I dragged him along to the Clichy prison, where a Quinn was serving his sentence. For some moments I looked in a sort of fear at the great prison doors, thinking that perhaps once they had closed on me I might not be able to get out again. I found it more difficult than I had thought to get into a prison, but I would not be discouraged. After much waiting and questioning, I was finally permitted to see him, a Quinn. "Aw, Rémi, boy, I was expecting you," he said, as I entered the room where visitors were allowed to see the prisoners. "I scolded Aunt Catherine for not bringing you with the others." I brightened up at these words. "The children tell me that you are going on your wanderings again. Have you forgotten that you almost died of cold and hunger, my boy?" "No, I've not forgotten that. You were not alone then. You had someone to look after you. At your age, I don't think it is right to go tramping across the country alone." "You don't want me to bring you news of your children, then?" I asked. "They told me that you were going to see them all, one after the other," he replied. "But I am not thinking of us when I ask you to give up this wandering life. And if I do what you ask, I should be thinking of myself and not of you, of Lise." This time he looked at me for several seconds. Then he suddenly took both my hands. "You have a heart, and I will not say another word, my boy. God will take care of you." I threw my arms round his neck. The time had come for me to say goodbye. For some moments he held me in silence. Then suddenly he felt in his vest pocket and pulled out a large silver watch. "Here, boy, take this," he said. "I want you to have it as a keepsake. It isn't of much value. If it had been, I'd have sold it. It doesn't keep good time, either. When anything is wrong with it, just give it a thump. It is all I have." I wanted to refuse such a beautiful present, but he forced it into my closed hands. "Oh, I don't need to know the time," he said sadly. "The hours pass slowly enough. I should die counting them. Goodbye, little Rémi. Always remember to be a good boy." I was very unhappy. How good he had been to me. I lingered round the prison doors for a long time after I had left him. I might have stayed there perhaps until night, if I had not suddenly touched a hard round object in my pocket. My watch. All my grief was forgotten for the moment. My watch. My very own watch by which I could tell the time. I pulled it out to see the hour. Midday. It was a matter of small importance whether it was midday, 10 o'clock, or 2 o'clock. Yet, I was very pleased that it was midday. It would have been hard to say why, but such was the case. I knew that it was midday, my watch told me so. What an affair! It seemed to me that a watch was a sort of confidential friend of whom one could ask advice, and to whom one could talk. "Friend watch, what's the time?" "Just 12 o'clock, my dear Rémi." "Really? Then it's time for me to do this or that. A good thing you reminded me. If you had not, I should have forgotten." In my joy, I had not noticed that Cappy was almost as pleased as myself. He pulled me by the leg of my trousers and barked several times. As he continued to bark, I was forced to bestow some attention upon him. "What do you want, Cappy?" I asked. He looked at me, but I failed to understand him. He waited some moments, then came and stood up against me, putting his paws on the pocket where I had placed my watch. He wanted to know the time to tell the distinguished audience. Like in the days when he had worked with VITALIS, I showed the watch to him. He looked at it for some time, as though trying to remember, then, wagging his tail, he barked 12 times. He had not forgotten. We could earn money with my watch. That was something I had not counted upon. Forward march, children. I took one last look at the prison, behind the walls of which little Lisa's father was shut, then went on my way. The thing I needed most of all was a map of France. Knowing that in the book stalls on the quays I could procure one, I wended my way towards the river. At last I found one that was so yellow that the man let me have it for 15 sous. I was able to leave Paris now, and I decided to do so at once. I had a choice between 2 roads. I chose the road to Fontainebleau. As I went up the Rue Malfitard, a host of memories rushed upon me. Garofoli, Mattia, Ricardo, the soup pot fastened with a padlock, the whip, and Vitalis, my poor, good master, who had died because he would not rent me to the PADRONE. As I passed the church, I saw a little boy leaning against the wall, and I thought I recognized him. Surely it was Mattia, the boy with the big head, the great eyes, and the soft, resigned look. But then he had not grown 1 inch. I went nearer to see better. Yes, it was Mattia. He recognized me. His pale face broke into a smile. "Ah, it's you," he said. "You came to Garofali's a long time ago with an old man with a white beard, just before I went to the hospital. Ah, how I used to suffer with my head then. Is Garofali still your master?" He glanced round before replying, then lowering his voice he said, "Garofali is in prison. They took him because he beat Orlando to death." I was shocked at this. I was pleased to hear that they had put Garofali in prison, and for the first time I thought the prisons, which inspired me with so much horror, had their use. "And the other boys?" I asked. "Oh, I don't know. I was not there when Garofali was arrested. When I came out of the hospital, Garofali, seeing that it was no good to beat me 'cause I got ill, wanted to get rid of me. So he sold me for 2 years to the Gasset Circus. They paid him in advance." "Do you know the Gasset Circus?" "No." "Well, it's not much of a circus, but it's a circus all the same. They wanted a child for dislocation, and Garofali sold me to Mr. Gasset. I stayed with him until last Monday, when he sent me off because my head was too big to go into the box. After leaving the circus, I went back to find Garofali, but the place was all shut up, and a neighbor told me what had happened. Now that Garofali's in prison, I don't know where to go. And I haven't any money," he added. "And I haven't had a bite to eat since yesterday." I was not rich, but I had enough to give something to poor Mattia. How I would have blessed one who would have given me a crust of bread when I was wandering round Toulouse, famished like Mattia now. "Stay here until I come back," I said. I ran to a bakery at the corner of the street and soon returned with a roll, which I offered him. He devoured it in a moment. "Now," I said, "what do you want to do?" "I don't know. I was trying to sell my violin when you spoke to me, and I would have sold it before, if I hadn't hated to part with it. My violin is all I have, and when I'm sad, I find a spot where I can be alone and play to myself. Then I see all sorts of beautiful things in the sky, more beautiful than in a dream. Why don't you play your violin in the streets?" I did, but I didn't get anything. How well I knew what it was to play, and not get a coin. "What are you doing?" he asked. I don't know why, but on the spur of the moment, I put up a ridiculous bluff. "I'm the boss of a company," I said proudly. It was true, but the truth was very near a falsehood. My company only consisted of Cappy. "Oh, will you?" began Mattia. "What? Take me in your company?" Not wishing to deceive him, I smiled and pointed to Cappy. "But that is all the company I have," I said. "Well, what does that matter? I'll be another." "Oh, please don't leave me. I shall die of hunger." Die of hunger? His words seemed to strike my very heart. I knew what it would be to die of hunger. "I can play the violin, and I can dislocate," said Mattia breathlessly. "I can dance on the tightrope. I can sing. I'll do anything you like. I'll be your servant. I'll obey you. I don't ask for money, food only. And if I do badly, you can beat me. That is understood. All that I ask is that you won't strike me on the head. That also must be understood, because my head is very sore since Garofali beat me so much on it." I felt like crying to hear poor little Mattia speak so. How could I refuse to take him with me? Die of hunger? But with me, there was also a chance that he might die of hunger. I told him so, but he would not listen to me. "No, no," he said. "When there are two, one doesn't starve, because one helps the other. The one who has it gives to the one who hasn't." I hesitated no longer. As I had some, I must help him. "Well then, it's understood," I said. Instantly he took my hand and actually kissed it in gratitude. "Come with me," I said. Not as a servant, Mattia, but as my chum. Shouldering my harp, I gave the signal, forward march. At the end of a quarter of an hour, we had left Paris behind. I left Paris by this route because I wanted to see Mother Barberin. How many times I had wanted to write to her and tell her that I thought of her, and that I loved her with all my heart, but the horrible fear of Barberin restrained me. If Barberin found me by means of my letter, he might take me and sell me to another man. He probably had the right to do so. I preferred that Mother Barberin should think that I was an ungrateful boy rather than run the risk of falling into Barberin's power. But though I dared not write, now that I was free, I could go and see her. Since I had taken Mattia into my company, I had made up my mind to do so, for it seemed to me that it could easily be arranged. I would send him ahead, and he could find out if she were alone, and then tell her that I was not far off, and was only waiting to know if it were safe for me to come and see her. Then, if Barberin were in the village, Mattia could ask her to come to some safe spot where I could meet her. I tramped along in silence, working out this plan. Mattia trudged by my side. He also seemed to be thinking deeply. The idea came to me to show off my possessions to Mattia. Unfastening my bag, I proudly spread out my riches on the grass. I had 3 cotton shirts, 3 pairs of socks, 5 handkerchiefs, all in good condition, and 1 pair of shoes, slightly used. Mattia was awestruck. "And you, what have you got?" I asked. "I've only got my violin." "Well, we'll go shares. Now we're chums. You'll have 2 shirts, 2 pairs of socks, and 3 handkerchiefs. But as it's only fair that we go shares in everything, you'll carry my bag for 1 hour and I'll carry it for another." Mattia wanted to refuse the things, but as I had quickly fallen into the habit of commanding, which I must say I found very pleasant, I told him to be silent. I had laid out Etiennette's needle case, and also a little box in which I had placed Lisa's rose. Mattia wanted to open this box, but I would not let him. I put it back in my bag without even lifting the lid. "If you want to please me," I said, "you will never touch this box. It's a present. I promise never to touch it," he said solemnly. Since I had again donned my sheepskin and my harp, there was one thing which caused me serious thought. That was my trousers. It seemed to me that an artist ought not to wear long trousers. To appear in public, an artist should have short trousers with stockings coming over them, laced over and over with colored ribbons. Trousers were all right for a gardener, but now I was an artist. Yes, I must wear knickers. I quickly took the scissors from Etiennette's work case. "While I arrange my trousers," I said to Mattia, "you ought to show me how you play the violin." "Oh, I'd like to." He began to play, while I boldly stuck the points of my scissors into my trousers a little above the knee. I commenced to cut the cloth. Yet, however, they were a beautiful pair of gray cloth trousers, with vest and coat to match, and I had been so proud of them when a Quinn had given them to me. But I did not consider that I was spoiling them by shortening them. Quite the contrary. At first, I scarcely listened to Mattia. I was too busy cutting my trousers, but soon I stopped manipulating the scissors and became all ears. Mattia played almost as well as VITALIS. "Who taught you the violin?" I asked, clapping my hands. "No one. I studied alone." "Hasn't anyone explained to you anything about music?" "No, I play just what I hear." "I'll teach you. I will." "You know everything, then?" "Well, so I ought to, if I'm the director." I wanted to show Mattia that I also was a musician. I took my harp and, wishing to impress him, I sang the famous canzonet. Then, as it should be between artists, he complimented me. He had great talent. We were worthy of each other. I buckled my knapsack and Mattia, in turn, hoisted it on his shoulders. We had to stop at the first village to give a performance. It was to be the first appearance of Rémi's company. "Teach me your song," said Mattia. "We'll sing it together, and I'll soon be able to accompany you on the violin." "That'll be pretty." Certainly, that would be pretty, and the distinguished audience would have a heart of stone if they were not generous in their offerings. At the first village that we came to, we had to pass before a large farm gate. Looking in, we saw a crowd of people dressed up in their best. Some of them carried bouquets tied with satin streamers. It was a wedding. I thought that perhaps these people might like a little music and dance, so I went into the farmyard and suggested it to the first person that I met. This was a big, good-natured looking man with a red face. He wore a tall white collar and a Prince Albert coat. He did not reply to my question, but turning to the guests, he put his 2 fingers in his mouth and gave such a shrill whistle that it frightened Cappy. "Say, you all," he cried, "what about a little music? The musicians have arrived. Oh, music! Music!" came the chorus. "Take your places for the quadrilles." The dancers soon gathered in the middle of the yard. Mattia and I took our places up in a wagon. "Can you play the quadrilles?" I whispered anxiously. "Yes." He struck a few notes on his violin. By luck I knew the air. We were saved. Although Mattia and I had never played together, we did not do badly. It is true the people had not much ear for music. "Can one of you play the cornet?" asked the big man with the red face. "I can," said Mattia, "but I haven't the instrument with me. I'll go and find one. The violin's pretty, but it's squeaky." I found that day that Mattia could play everything. We played until night, without stopping. It did not matter for me, but poor Mattia was very weak. From time to time I saw him turn pale as though he felt ill, yet he continued to play, blowing with all his might. Fortunately, I was not the only one who saw that he was ill. The bride remarked it also. "That's enough," she said. "That little chap is tired out. Now all hands to your pockets for the musicians." I threw my cap to Cappy, who caught it in his jaws. "Give your offerings to our secretary, if you please," I said. They applauded, and were delighted at the manner in which Cappy bowed. They gave generously. The husband was the last, and he dropped a 5-franc piece in the cap. The cap was full of silver coins. What a fortune! We were invited to supper, and they gave us a place to sleep in the hay loft. The next day, when we left this hospitable farm, we had a capital of 28 francs. "I owe this to you, Mattia," I said, after we had counted it. "I could not have made an orchestra all alone." With 28 francs in our pockets, we were rich. When we reached Corbeil, I could very well afford to buy a few things that I considered indispensable. First, a cornet, which would cost 3 francs at a second-hand shop, then some red ribbons for our stockings, and, lastly, another knapsack. It would be easier to carry a small bag all the time than a heavy one in turns. "A boss like you, who doesn't beat one, is too good," said Mattia, laughing happily from time to time. Our prosperous state of affairs made me decide to set out for Mother Barberin's as soon as possible. I could take her a present. I was rich now. There was something that, more than anything else, would make her happy. Not only now, but in her old age, a cow that would replace poor Rosette. How happy she would be if I gave her a cow, and how proud I should be. Before arriving at Chavanon, I would buy a cow, and Mattia would lead it by a rope right into Mother Barberin's yard. Mattia would say to her, "Here is a cow I've brought you. A cow," she would say. "You've made a mistake, my boy." And she would sigh. "No, I haven't." Mattia would answer, "You're Mother Barberin of Chavanon, aren't you? Well, the prince, like in fairy tales, has sent you this as a present. What prince?" Then I would appear and take her in my arms, and after we had hugged each other, we would make some pancakes and apple fritters, which would be eaten by the 3 of us and not by Barberin. As on that Shrove Tuesday when he had returned to upset our frying pan and put our butter in his onion soup. What a beautiful dream! But to realize it, we must first buy the cow. How much would a cow cost? I had not the slightest idea. A great deal probably, but still. I did not want a very big cow, because the fatter the cow the higher the price, And then the bigger the cow, the more nourishment it would require, and I did not want my present to be a source of inconvenience to Mother Barbarian. The essential, for the moment, was to find out the price of cows, or rather, of a cow of the kind that I wanted. Fortunately, that was not difficult, for we often met many farmers and cattle dealers at the different villages where we stopped. I put the question to the first I met at the inn that day. He burst out laughing and gave a bang on the table. Then he called the landlady. "This little musician wants to know how much a cow costs. Not a very large one, but a very healthy one that'll give plenty of milk." Everyone laughed. I didn't care though. "Yes, she must give good milk and not eat too much," I said. "And she mustn't mind being led along the lanes by a halter." When he had had his laugh, he was quite willing to enter a discussion with me and to take the matter seriously. He had just the very thing, a nice cow which gave delicious milk, real cream, and she hardly ate anything. If I would put down 50 ecus, the cow was mine. Although I had had trouble in making him talk at first, once he commenced it was difficult to stop him. Finally, we were able to retire for the night, and I dreamed of all I had learned from him. 50 ecus, that was 150 francs. I had nothing like that great sum. Perhaps if our luck still continued I could, if I saved so by so, get together the 150 francs. But it would take time. In that case, we should have to go, first of all, to Varza's and see Benny and give all the performances that we could on our way. And then on our return we would have the money, and we would go to Chavanon and act the fairy tale. The Prince's Cow. I told Mattia my plan, and he raised no objections.